Hey guys, tonight we are heading back to the American Wild West, but we are going to skip the dramatic gunfights and the heroic standoffs. Instead, we are diving nose first into the one thing Hollywood conveniently forgets to show you: the staggering, eye-watering, world-class filth. You're about to become a settler in a frontier town. Then let me give you a little heads up. Based on the sanitary conditions alone, your chances of making it through the first week are, let's just say, statistically challenging. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Then while you are at it, drop a comment and let me know what city you are listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see where our little history community is spread out across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The journey has been long, bone-rattling, and dusty. For weeks, you've been crammed into a stagecoach, swaying over vast, empty prairies under a sky so big it feels infinite. The air out there was clean, sharp, scented with sagebrush and dry earth. That memory is important, because it's about to be violently erased. The coach lurches to a final, jolting stop. The door creaks open. This is it, your new home. Welcome to Prosperity Gulch, or maybe Dusty Creek, or Fort Redemption. The names are always grander than the reality. You swing your legs out, eager to stand on solid ground after so long. But the ground isn't solid. Your boot, the one you painstakingly cared for, doesn't land with a satisfying thud. It lands with a wet, obscene shorpee. You sink, not just a little, but a good 4 inches into a thick, clinging substance that is most definitely not just mud. You try to pull your foot back, but the suction is powerful. A wave of panic, quickly followed by disgust, washes over you. You look down. The main street of your new town is not a street. It is a trough, bay-wide, brown, turning ribbon of primordial ooze. The foundation of this slurry is dirt. Sure, but it's been lovingly enriched by weeks of rain with nowhere to drain. And then there are the additives. The most obvious is manure. Everywhere, horses are tethered to every post, their droppings steaming gently in the cool air. A team of oxen that just pulled a freight wagon through stands flank deep in the muck, looking as miserable as you feel, adding their own contribution to the mix. But it's not just the draft animals. A few pigs, their snouts caked in filth, are trotting happily through the mire, waiting for discarded treasures. This, you'll later learn, is the town's unofficial sanitation department. It is a strange and deeply flawed system. People let their pigs roam free to eat the garbage tossed into the street, which seems practical, until you realize the pigs are just converting vegetable peels and old bread into yet more manure, which they deposit right back where they found their lunch. It is the circle of life, I guess. Just a really, really gross version of it. You finally wrench your foot free with a sound like a giant tearing a strip of wet canvas. The smell hits you then. It is not one smell, but a complex, layered assault on your nostrils. It is the earthy, sour smell of the mud, the sharp ammonia of fresh manure, and the deeper, our scent of old, decomposing waste, woven into. That is the tang of rotting kitchen slops thrown from a nearby saloon, the faint but unmistakable odor of a dead rat somewhere nearby, and the metallic scent of the blacksmith's forge down the way. You smell bad things on your journey, but this is a constructed, concentrated bouquet of human and animal filth. It is the signature of fragrance of civilization on the frontier. Historians still debate whether people eventually grew nose-blind to this constant stench, a phenomenon known as olfactory fatigue, or if they simply lived in a state of perpetual, low-level sensory disgust, their faces permanently fixed in a slight grimace, looking up from your sullied boot. You take in the rest of the scene. The buildings are rough-hewn, unpainted timber, leaning against each other for support like tired drunks. There are no sidewalks. Doors open directly into the muck. To cross the street, people either resign themselves to wading through it or attempt a treacherous journey across a few random, Slimy planks that have been thrown down as a half-hearted bridge. You watch a man in a bowler hat misjudge his step. His leg plunging into the goo almost to his knee. He lets out a string of curses that are both shocking and, you have to admit, entirely appropriate for the situation. This is your grand arrival, the heroic quest, the land of opportunity. Your first act as a bold pioneer is trying to figure out how to get your luggage from the coach to the door of that building marked hotel without losing a boot or your lunch. The romantic image of the lone cowboy riding into a pristine sunset feels like a joke someone told in another universe. Right now, your entire universe is this 20-yard stretch of stinking, sucking mud. You take a deep, bracing breath, instantly regretting it, and prepare to take your next squelching step. You need to find a room, a bed, some small corner of this town that isn't actively trying to swallow you. You take that first, hesitant step toward the building marked hotel, your eyes fixed on your footing. But it is not a sight that alerts you to the next layer of this town's reality. It is a sound, a low, persistent, all-encompassing hum. It is a sound you might mistake for distant machinery or the vibration of the earth itself. But, as you take another step, it resolves into what it truly is. The collective drone of a million tiny wings. You look up, and you see them. The flies. They are not just a few buzzing annoyances. They are a shimmering, shifting curtain that hangs over the entire town. They form thick, black clouds around the steaming piles of manure, rise in agitated swarms when a horse swishes its tail, and coat the sides of the buildings like a grotesque, living paint. These aren't the small, shy house fleas you might be used to. These are big, bold, iridescent green and blue bottle flies, fat from a diet of unimaginable richness. They are the true citizens of this town, and you are merely a visitor in their kingdom. As you navigate the treacherous path of planks and semi-solid ground, the cloud envelops you. They don't seem to care that you are a person. You are just another warm surface, another potential landing strip. One lands on your cheek. It's tiny, disgusting feet tickling your skin. You swat it away with a shudder, to more immediately take its place on the back of your neck. You try to speak, to mutter a curse, but a fly buzzes straight for your lips and you clamp your mouth shut. They crawl on your coat, on your head, on the handle of your luggage. The air is so thick with them that you feel like you are wading through not just mud, but a living, buzzing soup. You look at the other people. A woman trying to sweep the dirt patch in front of her always seems to be engaged in a losing battle, her broom creating more of a disturbance in the fly population than a dent in the dirt. A couple of men leaning against a post are talking, swatting at their faces with a practiced, unconscious rhythm, as if it were a nervous tick they had since birth. This constant, low-grade battle is just part of the fabric of life here. Some historians argue that the famously short tempers and hair-trigger violence of the Wild West might have been exacerbated by this simple, maddening, inescapable annoyance. It is hard to be a stoic hero when you have a fly trying to crawl up your nose every 10 seconds. You finally reach the covered porch of a building that looks like a general store. You push open the door. Desperate for a reprieve, the buzzing softens, but it doesn't vanish. Hanging from a ceiling beam is a long, sticky, mustard yellow strip of paper. It is black with the bodies of captured flies, a grim monument to a war that can never be won. This is fly paper, an early and deeply unsatisfying form of pest control. It is a Jackson Pollock of dead insects, and it smells faintly of glue and decay. It is one of the few acknowledgments you've seen that the flies are, in fact, a problem. What you, and almost everyone else in this era, don't fully grasp is the true danger. You see them as a nuisance. Disgusting, yes. Annoying, absolutely, but deadly. The thought has crossed your mind. The germ theory of disease is a fringe idea, decades away from being common knowledge. You don't know that every time a fly lands on your skin, it is potentially depositing microscopic passengers it picked up from the festering garbage heap, the open pit teal hid out back, or the diseased carcass of a dog down the lane. You don't make the connection between the flies and the devastating summer complaint, the catch-all term for the dysentery, typhoid, And cholera that could sweep through a town like this and wipe out a third of its population in a few weeks. People blame it on me as my ass, or bad air, not realizing the bad air is just the smell of the very things that are breeding the tiny, winged messengers of death. The academic world still discusses just how devastating this ignorance was, without understanding the vector. Any attempts at public health were doomed to fail. They might try to burn foul-smelling garbage, not realizing the real problem was the invisible life teeming within it, and the flies carrying that life from the garbage to their dinner table. Stepping out of the store, you feel a renewed sense of urgency. The hotel is just next door. You pull your collar up, lower your head like you are walking into a blizzard, and make a final push for the door. The buzzing rises to a crescendo in your ears. You can feel them bouncing off your hat. You reach the hotel door, grab the handle, which feels suspiciously sticky, and pull it open, tumbling inside and quickly shoving it closed behind you. The sound is cut off, replaced by the relative quiet of the hotel lobby. You lean against the door for a moment, breathing heavily. You've escaped the mud. You've escaped the flies. But you are about to discover that you haven't escaped the filth. You've just found a more concentrated, indoor version of it. The lobby of the Grand Occidental Hotel, a name far too grand for the cramped, dimly lit room you've just entered, is an oasis of relative calm. The roar of the flies is gone, replaced by the low murmur of men's voices from a corner and the slow, rhythmic ticking of a large, dusty clock on the wall. The air in here is different, too. It is not the sharp, complex stench of the street, but a thick, stale effigy of old cigar smoke, spilled whiskey, and something you can only describe as unwashed humanity. It is the smell of a sealed room that has absorbed the exhalations and perspiration of hundreds of transients. Behind a scarred wooden counter, a man with a magnificent, food-stained mustache is sleeping, his head resting on a large, open ledger. Your entrance has disturbed him. You clear your throat. Nothing. You tap your fingers on the counter. He snorts, shifts slightly, but remains asleep. Finally, you rap your knuckles firmly on the wood. He jolts awake, blinking at you with bleary, resentful eyes. How do you want? He grumbles, his voice thick with sleep. Die room, you say, trying to sound more confident than you feel. He squints, looks you up and down, then lets out a long sigh, as if you've asked him to perform some Herculean task. He turns a page in the ledger, licks his thumb noisily, and scans the list. Cut one, 50 cents. In advance, you dig the coins out of your pocket, their metallic clink sounding loud in the quiet room. He scoops them up without a word and plucks a key from a hook on the wall. It is a heavy, iron key, attached to a block of wood with a faded number 7 painted on it. Up the stairs, end of the hall. He points vaguely with his chin, then promptly rests his head back on the ledger, his part in this transaction clearly over. You grab your luggage and head for the staircase. The wood groans under your weight with every step. The banister is sticky to the touch. Then you quickly let go. The wallpaper on the way up is a faded floral pattern, but its original cheerfulness is obscured by dark, greasy patches at shoulder height. The accumulated grime from countless hands and bodies leaning against it. The hallway upstairs is a long, dark tunnel with a single, grimy window at the far end. There are 4 doors on either side. You find number 7 and slide the heavy key into the lock. It turns with a rusty shriek, and you push the door open. The room is small, barely big enough for the iron frame bed that dominates the space. There is a small washed sand in the corner holding a porcelain bowl and pitcher, a single wooden chair, and a single nail hammered into the wall to serve as a closet. The window looks out onto a narrow, trash-filled alley. This is luxury on the frontier. You drop your bag and walk over to the bed. You are so tired, you just want to collapse. But something gives you pause. You reach out and tentatively touch the blanket. It is a coarse, gray wool, stiff and slightly damp. You pull it back. The sheets underneath are, well, they are not white. They are a constellation of shades of gray and yellow, with a few prominent, unidentifiable brown stains. A faint, sour smell rises from them. You have stumbled upon one of the great unwritten rules of frontier travel. Hotel sheets were rarely, if ever, changed between guests. The concept of daily laundry was a fantasy. Water had to be held by hand, heated on a wood stove, and soap was a precious commodity. For a hotelier like the man downstairs, the most efficient business practice was to simply rent the room again and again, until the sheets became so visibly soiled that a complaint was unavoidable. Even then, washing might just mean a quick rinse in cold water and hanging them out back to dry. There is a long-standing debate among historians about the commonality of the sleeping bag for travelers in the West. Some suggest that savvy travelers carried their own bed rolls or blankets specifically to avoid this situation, laying their own bedding on top of the hotel's dubious offerings. This was your personal germ barrier. You, unfortunately, are not a savvy traveler. You are a newcomer, and you came unprepared. You look at the pillow. The pillowcase is even worse than the sheets, bearing a dark, greasy oval where the last dozen heads have rested. You could almost smell the hair tonic and sweat. The thought of putting your face on it makes your stomach churn. You consider sleeping on the floor, but a quick glance reveals dust bunnies the size of small rodents and a suspicious-looking crack in the floorboards. Then you consider the chair, that it looks hard, unforgiving, and likely to give you a splinter. Your options are limited. The bed, with all its history, is the only real choice. You make a decision. You take off your coat, fold it as neatly as possible, and place it over the pillow, creating a makeshift, slightly less disgusting barrier for your head. You decide to sleep fully clothed, pulling your boots off but leaving everything else on, including your hat if you could manage it. It is a flimsy shield against the microscopic world teeming in the mattress and sheets, but it is a psychological one. You are not in the bed, you're just on it. You lie down stiffly on top of the blanket, your body aching from the journey. The springs of the old mattress protest with a chorus of squeaks and groans. The room is cold, the stale air is thick. Through the thin walls, you can hear a man in the next room coughing, a deep, rattling cough that seems to shake the whole building. You close your eyes, trying to ignore the smells, the sounds, and the distinct feeling that you are not alone in this bed, even if you can't see your roommates. This isn't rest. It is just a temporary ceasefire in your battle with the filth of the West. After a few hours of fitful, unsatisfying sleep, a new urgent need makes itself known. The meager meal and watered-down coffee you had hours ago on the stagecoach have run their course. You need a toilet. You sit up on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning in protest, and scan your tiny room. There is no chamber pot under the bed, a small mercy you hadn't expected but are now grateful for. This means there must be a designated facility somewhere. An outhouse, a privy, a necessary. It went by many names, but the experience was universally grim. You pull on your boots, grab your tea, and venture back into the dark, silent hallway. Downstairs, the lobby is empty save for the clerk, who is still asleep in his chair. A gentle snore now, accompanying the ticking of the clock. You don't want to wake him to ask for directions. The less interaction with him, the better. You spot a back door behind the staircase, a likely path to the hotel's rear yard. You slip outside into the pre-dawn chill. The air is damp and cold, a temporary reprieve from the smells inside. The alley behind the hotel is a narrow canyon of filth, even worse than the main street. It is a dumping ground for the hotel's refuse, piles of ash from the stoves, broken bottles, and a heap of what looks like rotting potato peels. And there, at the far end of the yard, is a small, cooked wooden shack. The objective. As you get closer, the smell finds you. It is a powerful, eye-watering stench of ammonia and raw sewage that cuts through the cold morning air. This is a smell that needs no introduction. You've arrived at the outhouse. It is a simple structure, a shed built over a pit dug into the hearth. There is no door, just an opening, and the classic crescent moon cut into the wood is not for decoration. It is the only source of lightened ventilation inside. You hesitate at the entrance, peering into the gloom. Inside, there is a simple wooden bench with 2 holes cut into it. A communal experience. You are just grateful it is empty right now. You step inside, and the floorboards feel spongy and unsafe beneath your feet. The air is thick, suffocating. You hold your breath, a futile gesture, and you look down into one of the holes. It is a mistake. The pit is nearly full. A churning, dark mass alive with flies, even in the cold. The sight is dizzying. This is the endpoint for all the hotel's guests. All of them, for months, maybe years. The concept of emptying an outhouse pit was a major, unpleasant undertaking. Sometimes, when a pit was full, the owners would simply move the shack over a few feet and dig a new hole, leaving the old one to fester, a buried landmine of disease. Some larger towns had night soil collectors. A job as appealing as it sounds, who would empty the pits under the cover of darkness. But in a place like this, unlikely. You quickly do what you came to do, trying not to touch any surface. There is no paper. Of course there is no paper. Toilet paper as we know it, rolled and commercially available, was a luxury of the distant future. Instead, next to the bench, there is a small box filled with what people used. Corncobs. They were plentiful, absorbent, and free. Old newspapers, catalogs like the Sears and Roebuck, or even smooth stones were also common. The idea of a shared, reusable corncob is something your 21st century mind refuses to fully process. But here, it was simple practicality. Historians often point to the outhouse as one of the single greatest public health disasters of the 19th century. These pits were rarely lined. The waste seeped directly into the surrounding soil, a slow-motion poison spreading underground. The contents contaminated the groundwater, trickling into the very wells and streams people drew their drinking water from. It was a perfect, closed loop of infection. The link between human waste and diseases like cholera and typhoid was not understood. People saw no contradiction in digging their privy 50 feet from their water well. The academic debate irritant if this was a problem, but rather quantifying the sheer scale of the death and disease it caused. It was a silent, invisible killer that operated from beneath their feet. As you step out of the foul-smelling shack, you take a deep breath of the comparatively fresh alley air. Your eyes are watering. Your stomach is churning. You feel deeply, profoundly unclean. You look around the small yard. Not far from the outhouse is a hand-cranked water pump, presumably for the hotel's kitchen and for guests to fill their washed sand pitchers. The pump is drawing water from a shallow well, sunk right here in this contaminated soil, not more than a stone's throw from the leaking privy. The connection is so obvious, so horrificously clear to you, yet completely invisible to the people of this time. Suddenly, you aren't just an observer of historical filth. You feel a genuine, primal fear. Every single system here, from the street to the bed to the water, seems perfectly designed to kill you. The lack of a toilet in your room, which you'd initially been thankful for, now seems like a near-fatal design flaw in the entire establishment. You hurry back inside the hotel, past the sleeping clerk, and up the stairs to your room. You look at the pitcher of water on your washed sand, which you had planned to use to wash your face. It suddenly looks like a glass of poison. You decide you are not thirsty. Not anymore. Back in your room, the grim reality of your situation settles in. The brief, horrifying trip to the outhouse has illuminated a terrible truth. You can't trust the water. That pitcher on the washed sand, which a few hours ago represented a small comfort, now sits there looking menacing. It is supposed to be for washing your face, brushing your teeth, maybe even taking a sip if you were desperate. But now you know where it likely comes from. A shallow well sunk into soil percolating with the contents of the privy. You walk over and pick up the heavy ceramic pitcher. You tilt it, and the water inside slosh gas. It looks clear enough. There are no visible floaters, no obvious discoloration, but your modern knowledge screams at you. You know that the deadliest threats are invisible. Cholera vibrio, Salmonella typhi, coli. A whole microscopic menagerie of death could be swimming happily in that deceptively clean-looking water. This was the great paradox of the West. Water was life. A settlement could not exist without it. But water was also a primary vehicle for death. Towns were built along rivers and streams for obvious reasons: transportation, a power source for mills, and a water supply. But that same river became the town's sewer. Upstream, a family might be drawing their drinking water. A few hundred yards downstream, another family might be dumping their chamber pot and tossing in animal entrails from last night's butchering. Further down, the local tannery would be washing hides, releasing arsenic and other chemicals into the current. By the time that water reached the next town over, it was a toxic soup. Even wells, which seemed safer, were a gamble. Most were shallow, hand dug, and poorly sealed, making them little more than collection points for contaminated surface runoff and groundwater. The act of drinking a cool glass of water on a hot day was, in essence, a round of Russian roulette. People got sick. Of course, they got terribly sick, but they didn't know why. They would blame it on the heat, on a stomach bug, or, in line with the prevailing miasma theory, on foul-smelling vapors rising from the swampy ground. They never suspected the refreshing water from the pump. Historians continue to debate the exact mortality rates from waterborne illnesses on the frontier, simply because diagnoses were so imprecise. A death might be recorded as fever, flux, or summer complaint. All of these could easily have been typhoid, cholera, or dysentery contracted from a single contaminated source. It is a grim accounting project, trying to count the ghosts of a killer no one could see. Your own thirst is becoming a pressing issue. The dusty journey, the salty food you last ate. Your body is craving liquid. But what can you drink? You eye the pitcher again. No, absolutely not. What are the alternatives? You could leave town and walk upstream for a mile or two, hoping to find a source that is less contaminated. But that is a long walk for a drink, and there is no guarantee it would be clean. A dead animal could be lying in it, just around the bend. Then you remember the one place in town that might have a safer option, the saloon. It seems counterintuitive. A place of vice and drowsiness as a source of clean drinking water. But the logic is sound. Saloons didn't serve water. They served beer and whiskey. The process of brewing beer involves boiling the water, which, unbeknownst to the brewers, kills most of the harmful bacteria. The high alcohol content of whiskey also makes it a sterile, if dehydrating, choice for many people in the 19th century. Drinking low alcohol beer or small beer was simply safer than drinking water. It was the default beverage for the whole family in many parts of the world. So, you have a choice. Dehydrate, risk cholera from the pump, or go have a beer for breakfast. The decision is surprisingly easy. You grab your hat, lock your grim little room behind you, and head back down the stairs and out into the muddy street. The sun is higher now, and the town is coming to life. More people are out, navigating the muck. The buzzing of the flies seems louder. You spot a large building with swinging doors and a sign that reads the Silver Dollar Saloon. That is your destination. Pushing through the swinging doors, you step into a world of dim light, the smell of stale beer, and sawdust on the floor. It is early, but a few men are already at the bar, nursing glasses. The bartender, a large man with an impressive mustache and a surprisingly clean apron, gives you a nod. What shall it be? He asks. A beer, you say, trying to sound casual, as if this is your normal morning routine. He draws a foaming mug from a wooden keg and slides it down the bar to you. It costs a nickel. You take a long, satisfying drink. It is warm, slightly flat, and has a bitter, earthy taste you are not used to. But it is liquid. Then crucially, you know, it is probably safe. As you stand there, nursing your breakfast beer, you realize you just learned a fundamental survival skill of the Old West. When in doubt, drink alcohol. It was a form of self-medication, not for the soul, but for the body. A defense against an environment that was actively trying to poison you. You've dodged one bullet, but the day is young, and this town has plenty more loaded chambers. Your breakfast beer has quenched your thirst, but it has done little to quiet your rumbling stomach. As you leave the relative safety of the saloon, The morning sun casts long shadows down the muddy main street, and the town is now fully awake. The air is filled with the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of the freight wagon, and the shouts of men herding a few stray cattle. It is in this bustling scene that you see him. The genuine, honest, to goodness cowboy. He is not the Hollywood version. He is not tall and square-jawed, with a clean-shaven face and a crisp, checkered suit. This man is weary and weathered, his face a mask of sun-baked dust and leather, with a few days of dark stubble. He is leaning against a hitching post, rolling a cigarette with practiced, nimble fingers. But it is not his face that commands your attention. It is his clothes. They look less like fabric and more like a form of organic armor. His trousers, originally some kind of sturdy canvas, are now so thoroughly impregnated with dirt, grease, and sweat that they seem to have the consistency of stiff leather. They are stained with coffee, tobacco juice, and darker patches you do rather not identify. His shirt, a dark wool that might have once been blue or gray, is similarly caked with the grime of the trail. There are no clean lines, no crisp folds. The entire outfit seems to have molded itself to his body over a period of weeks, or maybe months. This is the reality of life on a cattle drive, the legendary job of the American cowboy. For 2 or 3 months at a time, a group of men would live on the open range, pushing thousands of cattle from the plains of Texas up to the railheads in Kansas or beyond. It was a life of constant work, exposure to the elements, and profound, inescapable dirtiness. You walk a little closer, feigning interest in a horse tied up nearby, just to get a better look. The man strikes a match on the sole of his boot, a boot caked in so much dried mud and manure. It provides a perfect striking surface, and lights his cigarette. The faint but distinct aroma of unwashed body odor drifts your way, momentarily cutting through the general stench of the town. It is a sour, animalistic smell, the scent of a man who has been near a bathtub in a very long time. Bathing on a cattle drive was not a priority. It was a rare luxury, indulged in only when the trail happened to cross a deep enough river on a warm enough day. Otherwise, the layers of sweat and dust were simply allowed to accumulate. This grime formed a protective shell, a kind of personal ecosystem. It was said that this layer of filth helped to insulate them from the sun and insects. Whether that is true or just a convenient excuse is a matter of some debate among historians. Some argue it was a practical adaptation, while others maintained it was simply the unavoidable consequence of a life without access to water and soap. And the clothes themselves, they were rarely, if ever, washed. A cowboy might own just sets of clothes, one for wearing, and one packed away in his bedroll. He would wear the first set until it was so stiff with filth and sweat that it became unbearable, or until it literally began to rot and fall apart off his body. This was an exaggeration. Fabric breaking down from a combination of constant friction and the chemical action of dried sweat was a real phenomenon. Only then would he switch to his second set. Washing clothes meant boiling them in a kettle over a campfire, a laborious process that no one had the time or energy for. You notice the way he scratches his side, a quick, furtive movement. It is a gesture you are starting to see everywhere. That, you realize, is the louse scroll. Lice were a constant companion. Body lice, or cooties as they were called, lived in the seams of clothing, feeding on blood and laying their eggs. They caused intense itching and could transmit diseases like trench fever. A common, though ineffective, method of delicizing was to lay the clothes over an anthill, hoping the ants would eat the lice in their eggs. More often than not, this just resulted in ants in your pants. In addition to the lice, this walking, breathing embodiment of bad hygiene before you is the reality behind the myth. The romantic image of the cowboy is a 20th century invention, polished and cleaned up for mass consumption. The real men who did the job were tough, resilient, and incredibly smelly. They lived in a state that would be considered a biohazard today. Their iconic gear, the bandana, the chaps, the wide-brimmed hat, all had practical, filth-related purposes. The bandana could be pulled up over the nose and mouth to filter out the choking dust kicked up by thousands of cattle. The leather chaps protected their trousers from thorny brush, but also from the constant spray of mud and manure. The hat shielded them from the sun, but also from the rain and whatever else might be falling from the sky. The cowboy finishes his cigarette, flicks the butt into the mud, and pushes himself off the post. He walks with a rolling gait, the result of long hours in the saddle. As he passes you, you get the full, unfiltered olfactory experience. It is a potent mix of sweat, smoke, horse, leather, and dirt. It is the smell of hard work and profound neglect. You watch him disappear into the general store, leaving you to ponder the vast, stinking gulf between the cowboys of the silver screen and the grimy reality of the men who actually lived the life. Seeing the cowboy in his grimy glory has made you acutely aware of your own state. You've only been in this town for less than a day, but you already feel a layer of filth clinging to your skin and clothes. The dust, the splash of mud from the street, the stale air of the hotel room. It all adds up. The thought of a bath, a simple, hot bath, becomes an all-consuming obsession. It is no longer about comfort. It feels like a vital necessity for your sanity. But how do you even go about it? Your hotel room has a washed sand, but the small bowl and pitcher are only good for a spit bath. A quick wash of the hands and face, and given your suspicions about the water source, even that seems like a risky proposition. You need a full immersion experience. You need a bathtub. This sends you on a new quest. You begin to walk the length of the main street, scanning the buildings for any sign of a public bathish. It is a long shot. In a town this rough, such a civilized amenity seems unlikely. You pass the saloon, the general store, the blacksmith, a land office, and another saloon. Just as you are about to give up, you see it, a small, unassuming sign hanging from a wooden post. Baths, Ashul, hot water extra. Hope surges through you. It is a small, slightly dilapidated building, but it represents paradise. You push open the door. The interior is steamy and smells of damp wood, soap, and something vaguely metallic. A small, harried-looking man sits at a desk, looking over a ledger. He looks up at you, his expression weary. A bath, you ask, the words feeling sacred. 25 cents for the tub and cold water. Another 25 if you want it hot. Soap's a nickel, towel's a nickel. He rattles off, his voice flat and rehearsed. They'll take it all, you say, perhaps a little too eagerly. Hearth, you pay the man. A significant sum that could have bought you a decent meal, but it feels worth it. He hands you a small, thin sliver of lace, opened a towel that looks less like a towel and more like a threadbare dishcloth. It is gray, stiff, and has a faint, sour smell, suggesting it has been used in there, dried many times without proper washing. Still, it is better than nothing. Cubicle 3, you south, pointing down a short hallway. You walk down the hall and find your cubicle. It is a small, private stall, sectioned off by rough wooden walls that don't quite reach the ceiling. Inside is a large, freestanding copper bathtub, its surface tarnished and green in places. There is a wooden stool and a few hooks on the wall. It is rustic, but it is private, and it contains the most beautiful object you've seen all day. A tub. A few minutes later, the proprietor and the boy come in, carrying steaming buckets of water, which they pour into the tub. The steam fills your little cubicle, and the smell of hot metal mixes with the soap. It is a glorious, promising aroma. They leave, and you are alone with your bath. You lock the flimsy door, strip off your dusty, travel-worn clothes, and step into the hot water. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated bliss. The heat soaks into your tired muscles, and you lean back, letting out a sigh of relief. This simple act, so commonplace in your own time, feels like the peak of luxury here. And for most people in the West, it was. Bathing was an event, not a routine. A full-body bath might happen once a week, or more likely, once a month. For many, it was a seasonal activity, reserved for the warmer months. The sheer labor involved was a huge deterrent. Water had to be hauled from a well or river, bucket by bucket. It had to be heated over a fire, a process that consumed precious firewood or coal. A single bath could require multiple trips and hours of work. The family bath was a common, sequential affair. The tub would be filled, and the father would bathe first. Then, in descending order of status, the sons, then the mother, then the daughters, and finally the baby, all in the same water. By the time the last person got in, the water would be cool, gray, and thick with the dirt of the entire family. The old saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," comes from this very practice. The water could be so murky by the end that a small infant might genuinely be hard to see. It is a folksy saying with a deeply unsanitary origin. As you scrub yourself with the harsh fly soap, you watch the clear water around you slowly turn a disturbing shade of brown. It is a visible testament to the filth you've accumulated in just one day. You are washing away the grime of the street, the dust of the trail, the stale air of the hotel. You feel yourself returning to a state of normalcy, of civilization, but the experience is not without its own historical quirks. You look at the soap. It is not a fragrant, gentle bar. It is lye soap, made from animal fattened wood ash. It is incredibly effective at cutting through grease and dirt, but it is also harsh and strips your skin of all its natural oils, leaving it feeling tight and dry. In the tub itself, while copper has natural anti-imbrickable properties, you have no doubt that it is not scrubbed clean between each use. The proprietor likely just drains the water and calls it ready for the next customer. You try not to think about the person who was in here right before you. There is a long-standing historical debate about personal cleanliness standards in the 19th century. Were people genuinely unbothered by their own body odor and grime, or were they simply resigned to it due to the practical difficulties of bathing? The existence of commercial bathhouses like this one suggests that at least some people desired and were willing to pay for cleanliness. It was a commodity, a status symbol even. To be clean was to show you had the time and money to spare. You finally pull the plug, and your dirty water gurgles away down a drain pipe that likely empties directly under the building. You dry yourself with the sad little towel and put your filthy clothes back on. The feeling of putting dirty clothes on a clean body is a uniquely unpleasant one. A reminder that this feeling of cleanliness is temporary. But for now, you feel renewed, refreshed, and human again. You've won this small battle, but you know the war against the dirt of the West is far from over. Feeling reborn after your bath, you step back out onto the main street. The world seems a little brighter, a little less oppressive. Even if you are wearing the same grimy clothes, your clean skin tingles in the breeze. But as you walk, you catch your reflection in a general store window, and you notice your hair as a mess and your stubble is starting to look less like a rugged statement and more like simple neglect. It is time for a shave and a haircut. You spot the iconic red and white striped pole a few doors down. The barbershop. You push open the door and step inside. The shop is a small, one-chair operation, but it is the social hub of the town. Two men are sitting on a bench, waiting their turn and trading gossip, while the barber, a portly man in a waistcoat with meticulously waxed mustache tips, works on a customer in the chair. The air smells of bay rum, talcum powder, and hair tonic, a pleasant, masculine scent that stands in stark contrast to the rest of the town. You take a seat on the bench and wait. The barber is finishing up a shave. Wielding a long, straight razor with practiced ease, he strops the blade on a long leather strap hanging from the chair. The swish, swish, swish a hypnotic, rhythmic sound. He lathers the man's face with a brush, scrapes away the foam and stubble with precise strokes, and finishes with a flourish in the hot towel. It is a ritual of civilized grooming, a small pocket of order in a chaotic world. When it is your turn, you settle into the large, ornate barber chair. It reclines with a satisfying clank. The usual, the barber asks, assuming you are a local, does the shave and the trim? You reply. He lathers your face, and the warm, soft brush feels wonderful. As he begins to shave you with the razor, you can't help but notice the tools of his trade laid out on a small table beside the chair. There is the razor, of course. Next to it are scissors, combs, and a few other items that look distinctly less like grooming tools and more like instruments of medieval torture. There is a terrifying-looking pair of forceps, a small, sharp knife that isn't a razor, and a device that looks like a drill bit with a handle. This is because your friendly town barber was often much more than a barber. He was the local surgeon and dentist. In an era before formalized medical training was widespread, and with doctors being scarce on the frontier, the barber-surgeon was a respected and essential figure. His skill with a sharp blade for shaving was seen as directly transferable to lancing a boil, letting blood, or even amputating a finger. The red and white pole itself is a relic of this dual profession, red for blood, white for bandages. As he shaves you, you overhear the men on the bench talking. One is complaining of a toothache that has been bothering him for a week. Just let Gus take a look at it. The other one says, gesturing with his thumb toward the barber, he'll have it out into shakes. The thought sends a shiver down your spine, a shiver that has nothing to do with the cold steel of the razor on your throat. The concept of germ theory, pioneered by Lister and Pasteur, is still years away from being accepted, let alone practiced. In a place like this, sterilization is an unknown concept. The barber wipes his razor on a communal cloth after each stroke. That same razor was likely used on the man before you, and the man before him. Any cut or nick is an open invitation for infection. In the dental work, it was brutal. If a tooth was causing pain, the only solution was extraction. There was no anesthetic, save for a large gulp of whiskey to steady the nerves. The barber, or tooth puller, would use a variety of tools. The most common was the tooth key, a claw-like instrument that was fitted over the tooth, clamped down, and then twisted. It was brutally effective but often broke the tooth, shattered the jaw, or took a chunk of gum and bone with it. The forceps you see on his table are a slightly more advanced, but no less terrifying, alternative. Historians are still uncovering the gruesome details of 19th century frontier medicine. There is a continuing debate about how much these practitioners actually helped versus how much they harmed. Did the barber surgeon's crude amputation of a gangrenous toe save a life? Or did the unsterilized blade simply introduce a new, more lethal infection that killed the patient a week later from sepsis? The records are sparse, but the anecdotal evidence points to a horrifying rate of post-procedural infection and death. It was a gamble, but when you were in agony from an abscessed tooth or facing blood poisoning from an infected wound, it was a gamble many were forced to take. Your shave is finished. The barber pats your face with some stinging, alcohol-based aftershave, combs your hair, and you are done. You look in the mirror. You look clean, respectable, human. The experience was, on the surface, perfectly pleasant, but the knowledge of what else happens in this chair, with these tools, lingers. You pay the man, nod to the others, and step outside. You touch your smooth chin. There are no nicks, no cuts. You were lucky. The man with the toothache is now climbing into the chair. You hear the clink of metal on metal as the barber picks up his forceps. You walk away quickly. You don't want to hear the scream. You've just had a close encounter with the cutting edge of frontier medicine, and you are deeply grateful that all you lost was a bit of hair. Your successful, non-surgical trip to the barbershop has left you feeling rather civilized. You are clean. You are groomed, and for the first time, you feel like you might actually survive this place. But your stomach, which has been politely waiting its turn, is now making its demands known with loud, insistent growls. The breakfast beer has long worn off. You need food, real food. You look around for something that resembles a restaurant. There is a building with a simple, hand-painted sign that reads EAT. It is not elegant, but it is direct. You can't ask for more than that. You push open the door and are met with a wave of heat from a large, cast iron stove and the smell of sizzling bacon, boiling coffee, and baking bread. It is a genuinely wonderful aroma, a welcome change from the town's usual olfactory offerings. The establishment is simple, a long communal table with benches on either side, and a few smaller tables scattered around. It is crowded with cowboys, miners, and townsfolk, all hunched over plates of food, eating with a focused intensity. A woman with a tired face and flour on her apron bustles back and forth from the kitchen. slamming down plates and refilling coffee cups. There is no menu. You just sit down, and food appears. You find a spot at the long table, squeezed between a large man who smells faintly of horse and a weary prospector who seems to be having a quiet, intense conversation with his fork. A moment later, a plate is placed in front of you. On it is a mountain of scrambled eggs, a thick slice of fried salt pork, a pile of fried potatoes, and a massive, crumbly biscuit. A tin mug of steaming black coffee accompanies it. It looks and smells delicious. You are starving. You pick up your fork. But as you are about to take your first bite, you can't help but notice the environment. The cook, visible through the open doorway to the kitchen, is a large, sweaty man with a magnificent beard that hangs down over the skillet. He wipes his brow with the back of his hand, and then uses that same hand to flip a piece of meat. The woman serving the food handles the money from the customers and then, without washing her hands, grabs a biscuit from a basket and plops it onto a plate. A stray dog wanders in from the street, sniffs around under the table for dropped scraps, and is shooed out with a shout, but not before it gives a good shake, sending a cloud of dust and dander into the air. And then there are the flies. Of course, there are the flies. They are here, too, buzzing happily around the plates of food, landing on the rim of your coffee mug, and performing acrobatic maneuvers over the communal butter dish on the table. The other diners seem oblivious, waving them away with a lazy hand now and then, but mostly just eating around them. A fly lands on your salt pork. You discreetly nudge it off with your fork. It immediately lands on your potatoes. This is the hidden ingredient in every meal: filth. Food safety was not a concept. Refrigeration was a luxury reserved for the very wealthy or for commercial operations like breweries that could afford a massive, insulated icehouse. For an everyday diner like this, meat was preserved by salting, smoking, or drying. The salt pork on your plate has a sharp, briny flavor that speaks of months spent in a barrel. Fresh meat was a rarity, unless something had been recently butchered, and even then, it was a race against time and bacteria. What about the vegetables? Well, they were whatever could be grown, locally unstored. Mostly potatoes, onions, and beans. The green, leafy vegetables you take for granted were almost non-existent. This led to widespread, low-grade malnutrition. Scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was surprisingly common, even far from the sea. Men on long cattle drives or in remote mining camps, subsisting on a diet of the 3Bs, bacon, beans, and bread, would develop bleeding gums, lethargy, and open sores. Historians are still piecing together the true impact of the frontier diet. The romanticized image of Chucklegan cooking with its hearty stews and sourdough bread is part of the story, but it often omits the monotony, the lack of vital nutrients, and the constant risk of foodborne illness. There is a debate about how much people understood the connection between their diet and their health. While they didn't know about vitamins, they did know that certain foods, like wild onions or berries, could ward off prairie fever, suggesting an empirical, if not scientific, high understanding of nutrition. You look down at your plate. Your hunger is warring with your disgust. The eggs are likely fresh enough, but the potatoes were probably peeled by dirty hands, and the salt pork has been sitting in a barrel for who knows how long. And the coffee. The water was boiled, so it is probably safe from a bacteriological standpoint. But what was the water quality to begin with? It might be full of minerals or have an alkaline taste from the local soil. They call it cowboy coffee for a reason. You boil the grounds and water together. Then pour a little cold water in at the end to help the grounds settle. It is strong, gritty, and will put hair on your chest. As the saying goes, you make a decision. You are going to eat. You have to. Survival trumps sanitation. You adapt the strategy of the locals. You eat quickly. You don't look too closely. And you try to keep the flies off your fork on its journey from the plate to your mouth. The food is surprisingly good. It is heavy, greasy, and salty, but it is filling. It is fuel. You finish your meal, swig the last of the gritty coffee, and pay the woman. As you step back out into the street, you feel a sense of accomplishment. You have successfully navigated another of the West's daily hazards. You are fed, you are watered with the air, you are clean for now. But as you walk, you feel a slight rumbling in your stomach that has nothing to do with hunger. You hope it is just indigestion. You really hope it is just indigestion. That unsettling rumble in your stomach has you on edge. Was it the questionable pork, the fly that did a tango on your potatoes, or just the general stress of being here? As you wander down the main street, trying to walk it off, your attention is caught by a commotion at the far end of town. A brightly painted wagon, gaudier than anything you've seen so far, has been set up as a makeshift stage. A man in a top hat and a flashy suit is standing on it, addressing a small but growing crowd. You drift closer. Intrigued, the man is a born showman, his voice a booming, confident baritone that carries over the noise of the town. He gestures with flourish towards a table laden with identical-looking brown bottles. Are you tired, friends? He bellows, his voice oozing with theatrical sympathy. Are you weary? Do you suffer from ailments of the liver, the lung, or the lumbago? Is your blood thin? Is your spirit low? Do you feel that creeping malaise, that prairie melancholy, that general lack of vim and vigor? He pauses, making eye contact with various members of the crowd, who nod along solemnly. He seems to be describing the general condition of every single person here. Well, I am here today, not as a merchant, but as a missionary of modern medicine, he declares, holding up one of the brown bottles. In my hand, I hold the answer, Dr. Vive, Abernathy's miraculous golden tincture, distilled from a secret formula of rare botanicals, handed down by the wise shamans of the Orient and perfected by the finest scientific minds of Europe. This is a traveling medicine show, a staple of the 19th century American landscape. These charismatic peddlers, often calling themselves professor or doctor, roamed from town to town, selling patent medicines that promised to cure everything from baldness to consumption. They were part quack, part entertainer, and part psychologist, masterfully playing on the hopes and fears of people who had little access to real medical care. This is not a mere tonic, my friends, the doctor continues, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This is a panacea. It cleanses the blood, fortifies the organs, and restores the natural balance of the humors. It has cured rheumatism in minors, colic in infants, and even, he pauses for dramatic effect, the heartbreak of a jilted lover. A few people in the crowd chuckle, but most look on with wide-eyed hope. You can't blame them. In a world of rampant disease, constant pain, and doctors who were more likely to harm than heal, a bottle of hope was a powerful temptation. You sidle up next to a grizzled old-timer who is watching the show with a cynical squint. Is this stuff any good? You ask him quietly. He spits a stream of tobacco juice into the mud. Depends on what you want it for. He grunts. If you want to cure your gout, it is hogwash. If you want to get cheap drunk and forget you have gout, it works just fine. And that was the secret to almost every patent medicine on the market. The secret formula of rare botanicals was usually a very simple, and not so secret, mixture. The primary active ingredient was almost always alcohol, often cheap, high-proof green alcohol, sometimes as much as 40% or 50% by volume. That is the equivalent of a bottle of 80-proof vodka. This accounted for the vim and vigor it provided. The second key ingredient was often an opiate, like laudanum, a tincture of opium or morphine. This took care of the pain relief, the calming of coughs, and the general sense of well-being. Other ingredients might include caffeine, cocaine, which was legal and a common ingredient in many products, including Coca-Cola originally, or simply molasses in water for coloring and flavor. So when someone took a swig of Dr. Abernathy's tincture for their cough, the alcohol and opium would indeed make them feel better, suppress the cough, and help them sleep. It didn't cure the underlying tuberculosis, of course. In fact, by masking the symptoms, it probably made it worse in the long run. But in the short term, It felt like a miracle. This led to countless people becoming unwitting alcoholics and drug addicts, completely dependent on their daily dose of medicine. There is an ongoing historical debate about the placebo effect versus the direct pharmacological effects of these tonics. Did people feel better simply because they believed they would? Or was it purely the narcotic and alcoholic kick? The answer is likely a combination of both. The charismatic sales pitch created a powerful expectation, and the potent, mood-altering ingredients delivered a tangible result, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of belief and use. The doctor on stage now brings out his shill, a plant in the audience who hobbles forward, groaning about his terrible back pain. He takes a dramatic swig from the bottle, waits a moment, and then begins to stretch and jump around, declaring himself cured. The crowd applauds, and hands start going up, waving dollar bills. The doctor and his assistant begin selling the bottles as fast as they can. You watch the scene, a mix of pity and fascination. These people aren't stupid, they are desperate. They are buying a temporary escape from pain, from fear, from the harshness of their lives. That rumbling in your own stomach suddenly feels more pronounced. The idea of a swig of something that would calm it down, even for a little while, is strangely tempting. You quickly push the thought away. You know what is in that bottle, and it is a cure that is far worse than the disease. You turn and walk away from the medicine show, leaving the charlatan to his work. Your stomach is still churning, and you've just learned another hard lesson. On the frontier, sometimes the most dangerous things come in a bottle, sold with a smile, leaving the charlatan and his miracle tonic behind. You decide to take a walk away from the chaotic main street. You wander down a quieter, residential side lane, if you can call it that. Here, the buildings are smaller, mostly simple cabins of rough-hewn logs or clapboard. These are the homes of the town's permanent residents, and it is here that you notice a different kind of activity, a different kind of struggle against the filth. You see the women. While the men seem to have either surrendered to the grime or are actively contributing to it, the women are engaged in a constant, fierce, and often losing war against it. In the small, hard-packed dirt yard in front of one cabin, a woman is on her hands and knees, scrubbing her wooden doorstep with a stiff brush and a bucket of water. Her knuckles are red and dry. She is trying to maintain a tiny island of clean in an ocean of muck. The 30 feet from her door to the main street might as well be a mile-long swamp. But this one square yard, this threshold, she will keep clean. A little further down, another woman is beating a rug that has been hung over a rope tied between a tree and her cabin. With each whack of the broom handle, a thick cloud of dust erupts, a visible explosion of the dirt that has been tracked inside. The sheer volume of dust is staggering. It is a Sisyphean task. The dust will settle right back down, and more will be tracked in tomorrow. But she beats it anyway. It is an act of defiance. The biggest battle, however, is being waged over laundry. In a communal area behind the cabins, several women are gathered around steaming cast iron pots propped over open fires. This is wash day, and it is an all-day, back-breaking ordeal. You watch the process, mesmerized by the sheer labor involved. First, water has to be hauled, bucket by heavy bucket, from that same questionable town well. Then, the fires have to be built and tended to get the water boiling. The laundry is sorted, whites first, to take advantage of the cleanest water. The clothes are dropped into the boiling water and agitated with a long wooden stick or a washboard plunger. Then comes the scrubbing. Each item is pulled from the scalding water and scrubbed vigorously on a washboard, a corrugated piece of metal or wood set in a frame. The soap is the same harsh, homemade lye soap you encountered at the bathish, which is brutal on both the fabric and the skin. After scrubbing, the clothes are rinsed, which requires more buckets of hauled water. Then, each heavy, waterlogged item has to be wrung out by hand, a process that strains the wrists and back. Finally, the laundry is hung on lines to dry, where it is immediately at risk of being coated in a new layer of dust blown in from the street or being splattered with mud by a passing horse. A sudden rainstorm couldn't do a whole day's work in minutes. This was the domestic reality for most women on the frontier. Their lives were a relentless cycle of hard physical labor aimed at pushing back against the encroaching tide of filth, while men's work was often outside the home, in the mine, on the range, at the forge. Women's work was a battle for domestic order and sanitation. They were the unofficial public health service of the West, and their work was never, ever done. There is a significant, and often overlooked, historical debate surrounding the psychological toll this endless, often futile, work took on frontier women. Letters and diaries from the period are filled with descriptions of exhaustion, loneliness, and a feeling of being overwhelmed. Some historians argue that the high rates of depression or melancholia among pioneer women were directly linked to the crushing burden of this domestic labor and the stark, indefinite conditions they were forced to endure. The romance of pioneering westward conveniently glosses over the woman spending 12 hours a day boiling stained long johns over an open fire. You see a young woman hang a pair of a man's trousers on the line. They are patched at the knee and the seat is a different color from the rest of the fabric, a testament to how precious clothing was. You didn't just throw things away. You mended, and mended, and mended again, until the item was more patched than original fabric. A small child, a toddler, toddless out of a cabin and promptly sits down in the dirt, happily beginning to make mud pies. His mother rushes out, scoops him up, dusts him off with a sigh of resignation, and carries him back inside. It is a perfect illustration of the struggle. For every step forward in the battle for cleanliness, there were 3 steps back. You realize that your 25-cent bath was an incredible luxury, a way to buy your way out of this labor. The women here don't have that option. Their family's health and comfort depend on their relentless efforts. The relative cleanliness inside their small cabins is a testament not to a clean environment, but to their sheer, stubborn will. They are the unsung heroes of sanitation in the West, fighting a war with soap and water, a war they could never truly win, but which they refused to stop fighting. The clean collar on a man's shirt or the white sheets on a bed were not simple facts. They were victories, hard-won and temporary. You look at these women with a new sense of awe and respect. They are not just washing clothes, they are holding the line for civilization itself. As you continue your walk through the residential part of town, you feel an annoying, persistent itch on your scalp. You scratch it, thinking it is just a stray bit of dust from the street. But the itch returns, more insistent this time. You scratch again, a little more vigorously. Then, another itch on your side, under your shirt, and another on your leg. A dawning, horrifying realization begins to creep into your mind. The hotel bed, the unwashed masses, the cowboy. You might have picked up some roommates. You find a secluded spot behind a water trough and, with a sense of dread, you furtively undo a button on your shirt cuff and peer at the seam of your sleeve. And there it is, a tiny, grayish-white speck. It moves. It is a louse. Your blood runs cold. You are infested. Welcome to one of the most common and miserable experiences of 19th century life. Lice, or cooties, or ubiquitous. They weren't necessarily a sign of poverty or extreme filth, as they are often viewed today. They were simply a fact of life in a world of infrequent bathing, limited changes of clothes, and crowded living conditions. You could be the cleanest person in town, but one night, in the wrong hotel bed, or a brush with the wrong person in a crowd, then you were carrying a new quality. There were 3 main types of unwelcome guests you could host. Head lice, which lived in the hair. Body lice, which, crucially, lived and laid their eggs in the seams of clothing, only venturing onto the body to feed. And finally, the notorious pubic lice, or crabs. Body lice were the most dangerous, as they were known vectors for serious diseases like typhus and trench fever. Though people at the time didn't understand the connection, they just knew the itching drove them mad. The itch is now becoming impossible to ignore. It is a crawling, irritating sensation that seems to be everywhere at once. You look at the people around you and start noticing the telltale signs you dismissed before. The subtle, habitual scratching, A man leaning against a wall, rhythmically rubbing his back against the rough wood like a bear. A woman in the general store, pretending to adjust her hair but really digging her nails into her scalp. They are all part of this secret, itchy fraternity. So, what do? You can't just go back to the bathish. A simple bath washes your skin, but it doesn't get the lice out of your clothes or hair. You need a remedy. You head to the only place you can think of that would sell such things, the general store. The store is a cavern of wonders, packed from floor to ceiling with everything a settler could possibly need. Sacks of flour, barrels of nails, bolts of fabric, axes, shovels, and ammunition. The air smells of leather, coffee beans, and dried apples. You find the section with various onyx ointments. Discreetly scanning the labels, you see salves for burns, liniment force or muscles, and several bottles of the same miracle tonics you saw at the medicine show. Then you find what you are looking for, a small tin labeled anti-louse powder. You buy it, along with a fine-toothed metal comb you see hanging nearby. The storekeeper doesn't bat an eye. Selling these items is as common as selling flour. He probably has an itch of his own. Once outside, you read the instructions on the tin. The powder is a mix of various botanicals and chemicals. Some delicizing powders of the era contain pyrethrum, derived from chrysanthemum flowers, which is a legitimate insecticide. Others, however, contained much more dangerous substances like mercury or arsenic. It was a kill or cure approach. You hope your tin is the flour-based kind. The real problem is your clothes. The body lice are living in the seams. The most effective method of delicizing clothing was to boil it, which would kill both the live lice and their eggs, known as nits. That you have no pot, no fire, and only the clothes on your back. Another common method, particularly for soldiers in the Civil War, was to run a hot iron nor a heated piece of metal along the seams to try and cook the lice and eggs. Again, not an option for you. You are left with the powder. You find another secluded spot and begin the unpleasant process of dusting the powder down your collar, up your sleeves, and into your trousers. It is a messy and dignified procedure. The powder is gritty and has a sharp, chemical smell. There is, of course, a historical debate about the efficacy of these folk remedies. Did dusting with strange powders actually work? Or did it just make people feel like they were doing something while the lice continued to thrive? Some historians argue that for every effective herbal remedy, there were useless or dangerous ones. Kerosene was a popular and extremely flammable cure for head lice. Combing out with a fine-toothed knit comb, like the one you bought, was probably the most effective and safest method for head lice. But it was tedious and had to be done repeatedly. As you stand there, dusted in a fine layer of questionable powder, feeling both foolish and disgusting, you realize that this is another form of the constant, grinding attrition of the West. It is not a dramatic gunfight or a deadly stampede. It is the small, miserable, everyday afflictions that wore people down. The constant itching, the low-grade infections, the aching teeth, the upset stomachs. These were the mundane realities that Hollywood leaves out. The itching seems to subside a little, whether from the powder or just your own wishful thinking. You can't be sure, but you know this is just a temporary truce. The nits in the seams of your shirt are a ticking time bomb. Until you can get a new set of clothes and properly boil or burn these ones, you are a walking, scratching, mobile home for a family of parasites. It is a deeply humbling thought. You are no longer a heroic pioneer. You are just another itchy soul in a very, very itchy world. The feeling of being a walking insectarium has fundamentally changed your perspective. Your clothes no longer feel like a protective covering. They feel like a contaminated prison. This new-found awareness makes you look at what people are wearing in a completely different light. You'd noticed the grime before, but now you see the deeper story of the fabric itself. You observe freighter wrestling with a stubborn mule. The man's wool jacket is a patchwork of repairs. The elbows are reinforced with mismatched pieces of canvas. The pocket is sewn on with a different color thread. The garment is clearly old, worn thin in places, but it is still in service. This was the fashion statement, a distressed look. This was a necessity. Clothing was precious. In a world before mass production and fast fashion, every garment was a significant investment of either money or labor. A ready-made shirt from the general store could cost $1 or more, which might be a full day's wages for a laborer. A sturdy pair of trousers could cost twice that. For many families, especially those on the frontier, most clothing was made at home. This was a long, laborious process that started with spinning yarn, weaving cloth, and then hand-sewing the garment. A single shirt could represent days of a woman's work. Because of this, you didn't just wear clothes, you managed them. You wore an item until it was too dirty to bear, at which point you might turn it inside out and wear it some more when it was finally washed. The process was so harsh that it weakened the fibers. When a hole appeared, it was patched. When the patch wore out, it was patched again. Clothes were passed down from older siblings to younger ones, worn until they were literally falling to shreds. This brings you to a rather startling concept, the idea of simply letting clothes rot off the body. This was just a figure of speech for some men, particularly solitary prospectors, trappers, or cowboys on a long drive. If you only had one set of clothes and no means to wash or repair them, you wore them continuously, day and night, through rain, sun, sweat, and mud. The constant cycle of being soaked and dried, combined with the friction of movement and the chemical action of sweat, would literally cause the fabric, especially cotton or cheap wool, to decompose. A shirt might first give way at the armpits, then the collar, until it was little more than a collection of rags hanging from the shoulders. There is some historical debate about the prevalence of this practice. Was it a common reality for a specific subset of the frontier population, or is it an exaggerated tale meant to emphasize the roughness of the era? While it is unlikely that the average town dweller let their clothes rot off, diaries and letters from the period do contain accounts of men emerging from the wilderness in clothes that were, for all practical purposes, disintegrating. It represents the ultimate endpoint of textile life, a state of utter material exhaustion. You look down at your own clothes. They are sturdy and relatively new, but the louse infestation makes you wish you could burn them. You start to think practically. You need a new set of clothes, not just for the sake of cleanliness, but for your own sanity. You head back to the general store, the epicenter of all commerce and solutions in this town. Inside, you find the clothing section. It is not a department store. There are no racks of different styles and sizes. There is a stack of stiff, new denim trousers, the kind made famous by a certain Mr. Levi Strauss for their durability. There are a few stacks of wool and cotton shirts, mostly in drab colors like gray, brown, and a dark, indeterminate blue. They are folded neatly, smelling of raw fabric and sizing starch. You pick up a shirt. It feels rough and stiff, nothing like the soft, pre-washed fabrics you are used to. It is built for durability, not comfort. Comfort was a luxury you had to earn by wearing the garment for months, breaking it in like a new pair of leather boots. You find a pair of trousers that look to be about your size. The denim is so rigid it could probably stand up on its own. You purchase a full new set of clothes, trousers, shirt, and undergarments. It is a significant expense, but it feels like the most important investment you could possibly make. Now you have a new problem. Where do you change? And what do you do with the old, infested set? You can't just throw them in a trash can. There are no trash cans. People throw their garbage into the street or into the alley behind their house. To discard your clothes, there would be to unleash your personal plague of lice upon the rest of the town. A thought that, despite your misery, seems profoundly unkind. The best, most sanitary option is fire. You need to burn them. You take your new purchases, wrapped in brown paper, and walk to the edge of town, near the blacksmith shop. The smithy keeps a large, constantly burning forge and a pile of coal slag and other waste nearby. It is the town's unofficial incinerator. Under the cover of the smoke and noise from the smith's hammer, you find a secluded spot, You quickly strip off your old clothes, feeling a strange mix of relief and vulnerability. You put on the new ones. The fabric is stiff and chafes your skin, but it is clean, gloriously, beautifully, undeniably clean. You feel like you've shed a skin, leaving behind the filth and parasites of the past few days. You take your old clothes, wad them up, and toss them into a pile of smoldering waste at the edge of the forge's dump. They catch fire slowly at first. Then, with a whoosh of flame, you watch them burn. A small, private cremation. You are severing your last link to the man who stepped off that stagecoach. You've been bathed, shaved, fed, and now reclothed. You have, piece by piece, rebuilt yourself according to the harsh demands of this new world. The stiff new clothes are uncomfortable, a constant reminder that you are still a stranger here, but they are a clean slate. And in this town, that is the most valuable thing you can own. Dressed in your stiff, new, and blissfully clean clothes, you feel a surge of optimism. Maybe you've finally gotten ahead of the filth. Maybe you've figured out the rules of survival. This feeling of well-being lasts for approximately an hour. As the afternoon wears on, a new and more terrifying threat makes its presence known, not through sight or smell, but through a palpable sense of panic that begins to ripple through the town. It starts with a woman running out of her cabin, screaming for a doctor. Then, a man stumbles out of the saloon, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Before collapsing in the mud, people start to gather in anxious knots, speaking in hushed, frightened tones. You catch snippets of their conversations. It is the flux, came on him so sudden, just like what happened in Willow Creek last summer. The town is in the grip of an outbreak. What they call the flux or the summer complaint is likely cholera or a virulent form of dysentery. It is a terrifyingly swift and brutal disease. One moment, a person is perfectly healthy, and the next they are struck down by violent vomiting and diarrhea. The fluid loss is so rapid and so extreme that it leads to severe dehydration, muscle cramps, and shock. The skin turns bluish gray. The eyes sink into their sockets, and death can come in less than 24 hours. To you, with your modern understanding, the cause is painfully obvious. It is the contaminated water from the well, the one sitting just yards from the leaky outhouse pit. It is the flies, which you've seen feasting on filth in the alley and landing on the food in the diner. It is the complete lack of sanitation that has turned this town into a perfect incubator for a waterborne pathogen. But for the people here, the cause is a mystery. They see it as a malevolent force, an invisible poison in the air. This is the miasma theory in action. They believe the disease is caused by bad air, the foul stenches rising from the mud, the garbage, and the privies. Their proposed solutions, while logical from their perspective, are tragically ineffective. They might try to combat the miasma by burning barrels of tar in the street, filling the air with thick, acrid smoke, or they might burn sulfur, which creates a choking gas. They are fighting the smell, not the source, the town's only real medical resource. The barber surgeon you visited earlier is completely overwhelmed and utterly helpless. He has no cure. His medical knowledge is based on the ancient theory of the four humors: blood, film, yellow bile, and black bile. He believes sickness is caused by an imbalance of these humors. His go-to treatment for almost everything, including thus, his bloodletting. He will use a lancet to open a vein and drain a pint of blood from the sick person, believing this will remove the excess humor and restore balance. The tragedy, of course, is that this is the absolute worst thing he could do. A cholera victim is already dying from dehydration and a loss of blood volume. Bleeding them only accelerates the process, pushing them into shock and death more quickly. There is a long and grim historical debate about how many patients in the 19th century were killed not by their diseases, but by their doctors. The phrase "died of the treatment" was a tragically common one. Fear spreads faster than the disease itself. People begin to quarantine themselves in their homes, stuffing rags in the cracks around their doors and windows to keep the bad air out. Neighbor turns away from neighbor. The healthy shun the sick, leaving them to suffer alone for fear of catching the illness. The fragile social fabric of the town disintegrates in a matter of hours. You see a family hastily loading their possessions onto a wagon, their faces etched with terror. They are fleeing. This was a common reaction to an epidemic. When disease struck, a significant portion of the population would simply abandon the town, scattering in all directions and, in the process, carrying the disease with them to the next settlement down the road. It is how these outbreaks spread across the frontier like wildfire. You are faced with a terrible choice. Do you stay undressed, becoming the next victim? Or do you flee, knowing that you could be an asymptomatic carrier? A walking time bomb. You retreat to your hotel room, which suddenly feels less like a safe haven and more like a trap. You don't dare drink the water from the pitcher. You don't dare go out for food. Your world has shrunk to the size of this 10 by 10 foot box. Through your window, you can see the grim business of the town's undertaker beginning. The man with a long, somber face is measuring a body that has been laid out on the porch of a cabin, covered by a sheet. The helplessness is the most frightening part. There are no antibiotics, no IV drips to rehydrate the sick. There is nothing to be done but wait and hope. The only effective treatment, which would not be widely understood for decades, is oral rehydration therapy, a simple solution of water, salt, and sugar to replace the lost fluids and electrolytes. It is a life-saving treatment that could have been made with ingredients from the general store, but the knowledge simply isn't there. The sun begins to set, casting a sickly orange glow over the panicked town. The smell of burning tar now hangs heavy in the air, a futile incense against an invisible god of death. The sounds of coughing and moaning drift from the houses around you. The flimsy walls of your hotel room offer no protection. You are a prisoner of 19th century epidemiology. You lie on your bed, fully dressed in your stiff, new clothes, and listen to the sounds of a town dying. And you pray that the rumble in your own stomach was, after all, just indigestion. You spend a sleepless night listening to the sounds of the epidemic, the coughs, the distant moans, the hurried, frantic footsteps in the street. By some miracle, you wake up feeling weak and dehydrated, but not sick. The vague rumbling in your stomach has subsided. You've dodged another bullet, but the night has taken a different toll. Dull, throbbing pain has started in your upper jaw. A toothache. At first, it is just a minor annoyance, a background hum of discomfort. You try to ignore it, telling yourself it is probably just from clenching your jaw all night. But as the morning progresses, the throb intensifies, sharpening into a piercing, relentless agony. The pain radiates from a single molar, up your cheek, and into your temple. Every pulse of your heart sends a fresh wave of fire through your nerve endings. You've had toothaches before. In your own time, you take a painkiller, call a dentist, and get a filling or a root canal. Here, your options are far more limited and infinitely more terrifying. You know where you have to go. You have to go back to the barbershop. The thought fills you with a profound, visceral dread. You remember the instruments laid out on the barber's table. The forceps that looked like they belonged in a blacksmith's toolkit. The unsterilized metal. The lack of any real anesthetic. But the pain is becoming unbearable. It is a raw, primal agony that short-circuits all rational thought. It demands a solution. Any solution. You stumble out of the hotel and down the street. The town is eerily quiet. The epidemic has driven most people indoors. The few people you see hurry past, their faces masked with fear, not making eye contact. The barbershop is one of the few places still open. Pain, unlike commerce, doesn't take a day off. You push open the door. The barber, Gus, is there, cleaning his razor. He looks up, and his usual cheerful demeanor is gone, replaced by a weary sadness. He has seen too much in the last 24 hours. Morning, he grunts. Haircut. You shake your head, wincing as the movement sends a jolt of pain through your jaw. Tooth, you manage to say, pointing to the side of your face. A look of understanding, mixed with a little pity, crosses his face. One of those. Let's have a look. You sink into the big chair, your heart pounding. He tells you to open your mouth. His fingers, which smell of bay rum and somebody else's hair, probe around your mouth. until he finds the offending tooth. He taps it with a metal instrument. You nearly launch yourself out of the chair from the explosion of pain. Yep, Shesu rotten one, he says with grim satisfaction. Let it come out. There is no discussion of alternatives. No fillings. No saving the tooth. In the 19th century, dental care was almost exclusively about extraction. The concept of preventative or restorative dentistry was in its infancy and certainly hadn't reached a frontier town like this. The prevailing wisdom was that a bad tooth was a seed of corruption that could poison the whole body. The only way to stop the poison was to remove the source. Nail, he says, turning to his instrument table. We can do this 2 ways, quick and loud, or a little less loud with some liquid courage. He holds up a bottle of whiskey. Whiskey, you croak, your throat dry. He pours you a generous 4 fingers in a dirty glass. Drink up, all of it. You toss back the roll. Fiery liquid. It burns a trail down your throat and hits your empty stomach with a jolt. It doesn't numb the pain, but it blankets your fear in a warm, fuzzy haze. The edges of the room seem to soften. The barber selects his tool. It is not the tooth key. Thank God. It is a pair of heavy, British-looking forceps. He holds them up to the light. You notice a dark speck on the tip. Dried blood from the last poor soul to sit in this chair. He doesn't bother to wipe it off. All right, head back. Open wide. This is it. You grip the arms of the chair, your knuckles turning white. The whiskey has made you brave, or maybe just reckless. The barber leans over you, his face a mask of concentration. You can smell the stale cigar on his breath. He forces the forceps into your mouth, the cold metal clanking against your teeth. He clamps down on the bad molar. The pressure is immense. It feels like your jaw is in a vice. Then, he begins to rock the tooth back and forth, loosening it in the socket. The sound is horrifying. A wet, grinding, cracking noise happening inside your own head. The pain is blinding. A white-hot supernova that eclipses the whiskey. The fear. Everything. And then he pulls. It is not a clean pop. It is a brutal, tearing sensation. You feel the roots ripping free from the bone and gum tissue. Your whole skull seems to groan in protest. You let out a muffled scream into the barber's hand. And then, it is over. He steps back, holding the tooth triumphantly in the forceps. It is a bloody, mangled thing with long, crooked roots. There is the little devil, he says cheerfully. Your mouth is filled with the hot, metallic taste of blood. You spit into a brass spitten by the chair. It is a horrifying amount of reed. He hands you a rag that may or may not be clean. Bite down on this. You'll be fined. That LLB 50 cents. You fumble in your pocket, your hand shaking, and pay him. You stumble out of the shop and into the harsh sunlight, your head swimming from the whiskey and the shock. The sharp, localized pain of the toothache is gone, replaced by a deep, throbbing, wounded ache in your entire jaw. Historians often debate the long-term consequences of this kind of dentistry. Without sterilization, the risk of infection was enormous. An extraction could easily lead to a jaw infection or osteomyelitis, which could be fatal, and the empty socket, it would just be left to heal on its own, often leading to problems with the surrounding teeth. You just traded a definite agony for a potential catastrophe. You lean against a wall, biting down on the rag, tasting blood and whiskey. You've survived another rite of passage in the Old West. But, as the adrenaline fades, a new fear creeps in, the open wound in your mouth. In a town ravaged by a waterborne plague, feels like an open door, inviting all the horrors of this filthy world to come rushing in. The throbbing in your jaw is a constant, grim reminder of your recent ordeal. You walk through the nearly deserted streets, tasting blood, feeling the phantom presence of the ripped-out tooth. The town, already steeped in the miasma of fear from the epidemic, now seems to have acquired a new, more tangible scent, the smell of death. It is not just a metaphorical scent. The town's undertaker, a lanky man named Silas, who also doubles as the carpenter, is having a very busy day. His workshop, usually filled with the clean smell of sawdust, now has a heavier, cloying sweetness hanging over it. It is the smell of unembalmed bodies, beginning the process of decay in the afternoon heat. You see him outside his shop, hammering together a simple pine box. Another coffin. They are being made at an alarming rate. These aren't the ornate, polished caskets of a peaceful death. They are crude, functional containers, slapped together as quickly as possible. There is no time for ceremony. Death on the frontier was a frequent visitor, but an epidemic like this overwhelmed the established rituals. Normally, when someone died, the family would wash and dress the body at home. Neighbors would come to sit with the deceased and awake. A final show of respect. The body would be laid out in the parlor, which is how that room got its name. It was the death room. Embalming was a new and rare science, mostly reserved for the wealthy in big cities or for preserving the bodies of soldiers, like Abraham Lincoln, to be transported home. For everyone else, decomposition was a swift and unavoidable reality. This is why funerals happened quickly, usually within a day or two, especially in warm weather. But with so many dying so fast, the system is breaking down. Silas can't build the coffins fast enough. Families, terrified of the disease, are no longer holding wakes. In some cases, victims are being wrapped in a sheet and buried directly in the ground, without a coffin at all. There is a quiet but persistent historical debate about how these mass casualty events changed the community's relationship with death. Did the constant exposure to mortality lead to a hardened, stoic acceptance, or did it create a deep, lasting trauma that haunted the survivors for years? The stoic cowboy archetype might suggest the former, but personal diaries from the period often reveal profound grief and terror. You watch as two men, their faces covered with bandanas, carry a shrouded body out of a house and load it onto a simple buckboard wagon. There is no family following, no procession of mourners, just two volunteers, likely paid in whiskey, doing a grim but necessary job. The wagon heads towards the edge of town, where a small, windswept hill serves as the cemetery. They call it Boot Hill. The name Boot Hill became legendary, synonymous with gunslingers who died with their boots on. The reality was often more mundane and far more tragic. These were the graves of transients, the poor, and the victims of epidemics, people who died suddenly, without family or funds for a proper burial. The burial process itself is another source of sanitary horror. The graves are often dug too shallow, only 3 or 4 feet deep. This is partly due to expediency and partly because the hard, rocky soil of the West is difficult to excavate with simple shovels and picks. The shallow grave presents a horrifying problem. The elements and local wildlife. A heavy rain could wash away the topsoil, exposing the cough, or the shroud, and scavengers, from coyotes to the town's own semi-feral dogs, could be drawn to the site. The stories of disturbed graves are the stuff of nightmares, but they were a grim reality. Furthermore, the location of the cemetery itself was oft unpurely chosen. Many were situated uphill from the town, and tragically, uphill from the water source. The decomposing organic matter from the graves, along with the bacteria that caused the deaths in the first place, could be washed by the rain down into the streams and wells, creating a new cycle of infection. The dead were, in a very real sense, poisoning the living. As you stand there, nursing your aching jaw, the undertaker's wagon rumbles past you on its way back from the hill. Empty now, the driver doesn't look at you. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, his face grim, emotional as masked. He has more work to do. The air in the town feels heavy, not just with smoke and dust, but with sorrow. The usual sounds of life, the blacksmith's hammer, the laughter from the saloon, the chatter of neighbors, have been replaced by an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the sound of Silas's hammer, building another pine box. You realize that the filth of this town isn't just in the mud on the streets or the lice in the bedding. It is a comprehensive, systemic failure that touches every aspect of life, from birth to death. The lack of knowledge about germs creates a world where the very acts of drinking water, eating a meal, or burying your dead are fraught with peril. The smell of death that you noticed is the ultimate testament to this failure. It is the scent of a community losing its battle against an enemy it can't see, an enemy it unwittingly helps. With every bucket of water it draws and every shallow grave it digs, The ache in your jaw is your own personal battle, but it is just one small part of the much larger and much deadlier war being waged all around you. The grim realities of the epidemic in your own throbbing jaw have driven you to seek refuge, not in your grim hotel room, but in the one place that seems to carry on regardless of plague or pain, the saloon. It is dark, it is relatively empty, and most importantly, it serves whiskey, which you now consider a vital medical supply. You push through the swinging doors of the Silver Dollar Saloon for the second time. It is late afternoon, and the place is subdued. The usual boisterous energy is gone, replaced by a quiet, somber mood. A few men are scattered at the tables, nursing their drinks in silence. The epidemic has cast a pall over everything. You limp to the bar and order a whiskey. The bartender, the same man from this morning, wordlessly pours you a glass. You take a sip, letting the fiery liquid numb the aching void in your jaw. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you take a closer look at your surroundings. The saloon is the quintessential image of the Old West, but like everything else here, the reality is far grittier than the myth. The long, polished bar is scarred with knife marks and cigarette burns. The mirror behind it is hazy with smoke and grime, but the true horror lies at your feet. The floor, it is made of rough wooden planks, but you can barely see the wood. It is covered in a thick, dark, sticky layer of something. It is a historical artifact, a geological stratum of filth built up over years. The primary component is sawdust, which was thrown down to absorb spills and other liquids. But it hasn't been changed in a very long time. It is now saturated with generations of spilled beer and whiskey, creating a damp, permanently boozy-smelling foundation. Mixed into this delightful slurry is a generous amount of tobacco. Men smoke cigars and pipes constantly, dropping ash wherever it fell. More viscerally, many of them chewed tobacco. The brass spit anise, or gaboons, placed along the floor were the designated targets, but accuracy was not always a priority, especially after a few drinks, so the floor is littered with spatters and pools of brown, gooey tobacco juice. Then there is the muddied manure tracked in from the street on the boots of every single customer. It dries and mixes with the sawdust and spit, forming a kind of unique, organic cement. And of course, there are the discarded odds and ends of saloon life. Spent matches, old playing cards, maybe a stray but an or lost coin, all slowly being absorbed into the floor's sticky embrace. You shift your feet, and your boot makes a slight sucking sound as you lift it. You have the distinct feeling that if you stood still for too long, you might become a permanent fixture. This floor is a perfect microcosm of the saloon's role in the town's ecosystem of filth. It is a collection point for every kind of grime, and it is not just an aesthetic problem. The constant dampness and organic matter made it a breeding ground for bacteria and mold. The air is thick with their musty, earthy smell, mixed with the sharper sense of alcohol and stale smoke. The spit and ass, rarely cleaned, were teeming with germs, including, most dangerously, tuberculosis bacteria. A person with consumption would spit into the gaboon. The bacteria would become airborne as the spit dried, and other patrons would breathe it in. The saloon, the social heart of the town, was also a highly efficient disease vector. There is a historical debate about the social function of this shared filth. Some sociologists argue that this disregard for cleanliness was a form of masculine bonding, a rejection of the domestic, feminine sphere of cleanliness. To be unbothered by the spit on the floor or the grime on the bar was a sign of being a man's man, tough and unpretentious. The saloon was a space where the rules of the parlor didn't apply. Spitting on the floor was an assertion of freedom from civilizing constraints. You take another sip of whiskey, trying to ignore the environment. In the corner, a man is playing a slow, melancholic tune on an out-of-tune piano. The sound is oddly fitting for the mood. You notice the saloon girls, or hurdy-gurdy girls, sitting at a table by themselves, looking bored and tired. Their job was to dance with the male patrons for a fee, a practice that gave them their name. They are often romanticized or vilified in Western lore, but here, they just look like women trying to make a living in a hard world. Their frilly, colorful dresses, which look so out of place in this grimy setting, are a stark reminder of the constant, exhausting effort required to maintain any semblance of glamour or cleanliness. You finish your whiskey and slide the empty glass across the bar. The numbness in your jaw is a welcome relief, but as you stand up to leave, your boot gives that same disgusting shorpy sound, pulling free from the floor's grasp. You look down at the sole of your boot. A disgusting clump of the floor's history is stuck to it. You've just taken a souvenir from the Silver Dollar Saloon. You step outside, back into the fading light and the fear-haunted streets. You scrape your boot on the edge of the wooden porch, trying to get the saloon floor off you. It is a futile gesture. You realize that in this town, you never truly escape the filth. You just carry it with you from one place to the next. The mud from the street comes into the saloon, and the grime from the saloon floor goes back out into the street. It is a closed, perfectly balanced, and utterly disgusting system. The numbing effect of the whiskey begins to wear off, and the dull ache in your jaw returns. You need a distraction, something to take your mind off the plague, the pain, and the general misery. You decide to walk, to get out of the suffocating confines of the town center. Your aimless wandering takes you past the edge of town, following a rough track that leads up into the nearby hills. It is here that you stumble upon another, even more concentrated, form of human settlement, a taojiindi, a gold mining camp. If you thought the town was bad, this is a whole new level of squalor. It is not a town, it is a raw, chaotic jumble of canvas tents, makeshift lean TOS, and crude wooden shacks clinging to the side of a steep, muddy ravine. The street is a narrow, treacherous path cut into the hillside, slick with mud and refuse. A creek at the bottom of the ravine, which should be a pristine mountain stream, is a muddy, brown torrent, choked with the silt and debris from the mining operations upstream. This is a placer mining camp, where men are sifting through the riverbed gravel for specks of gold. The air here smells different. It has the town's base notes of human and animal waste. But layered on top is the sharp, metallic scent of wet rock and the acrid smoke from hundreds of individual campfires. The population is almost entirely male, a rough-looking collection of men from all over the world, drawn by the promise of instant wealth. Their faces are bearded and grimy, their clothes are in rags, and their eyes have a feverish, obsessive glint. This is the gold rush, a phenomenon that drew hundreds of thousands of people to the West. But the romantic image of a lucky prospector shouting Eureka and holding up a giant nugget is the exception. The reality, for the vast majority, was back-breaking labor, disappointment, and a life of extreme hardship in some of the most unsanitary conditions imaginable. You watch the men working in the creek. They stand knee-deep in the icy water for hours on end, shoveling gravel into long wooden rafts called sluice boxes or swirling it in wide, flat pans. The constant exposure to cold water lead to rheumatism, arthritis, and other ailments. Their diet was even worse than in town, consisting almost exclusively of non-perishable staples like beans, flour, and salt pork, which they had to carry in on their backs. Scurvy grass and other local edible plants were a vital, if often overlooked, source of vitamin C. The sanitation in the camp is non-existent. There are no outhouses. The entire ravine is treated as a latrine. The creek serves as both the sewer and the only source of drinking and cooking water. A man upstream might be relieving himself directly into the water, while another man 100 yards downstream is filling his canteen. The connection between this practice and the rampant outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid, and cholera that regularly swept through these camps was completely lost on them. Mortality rates in the mining camps were astoundingly high, with disease killing far more men than mining accidents or violence. There is a long-standing historical debate about the social structure, or lack thereof, in these camps. Were they all the stands of anarchy, or did they develop their own informal systems of justice and governance? The evidence suggests it was a mix of both. While violence was common, miners also formed claims clubs and established their own sets of rules for adjudicating disputes. often with a miner's court where justice was swift and punishments were harsh. You see a man stumble away from the creek, his face pale. Hair etches violently into the bushes. Is it the flux, like in town, or is it something else? Some mining techniques involved using mercury to amalgamate with the fine gold dust, making it easier to separate. The miners would then burn off the mercury to isolate the gold. This process released toxic mercury vapor, which they would breathe in. Chronic mercury poisoning, with its symptoms of tremors known as the Hatter's shakes, memory loss, and kidney failure, was a hidden plague in many mining districts. The living quarters are no better than the working conditions. You peer into an open tent flap. Inside, 2 men are sleeping on a pile of dirty blankets on the bare ground. The air is thick and stale. Their few possessions, though, the cask, a shovel, a coffee pot, a tin plate, are scattered around in the dirt. The ground is crawling with insects. It is a scene of profound squalor. This is the price of gold fever. For the tiny chance of striking it rich, these men abandoned their homes, their families, and any semblance of a civilized, healthy life. They traded comfort, safety, and sanitation for a dream. The vast majority found only hardship, disease, and an early grave. The gold they extracted would go on to fuel the nation's economy, but the human cost, paid here in the mud and filth of this ravine, was immense. You turn away from the camp, the sight of it leaving a sour taste in your mouth that has nothing to do with your tooth. You've seen the destination for the town's hopefuls and dreamers. The path to riches is paved with mud, disease, and despair. You head back towards the dubious comforts of the town, feeling a strange new appreciation for its relative order. It may be a filthy, dangerous place, but compared to the raw, festering sore of the mining camp, it looks almost like paradise. Retreating from the raw squalor of the mining camp, you walk back towards the center of town. The throbbing in your jaw has settled into a persistent, weary ache, a reminder of the violence it endured. As you get closer to the main street, a new and powerful smell muscles its way through the town's already complex bouquet of odors. It is a thick, heavy, deeply unpleasant smell, a combination of raw meat, decaying flesh, harsh chemicals, and something acrid that burns the back of your throat. You follow your nose, morbidly curious about the source of this new assault on your senses. Your journey leads you to a cluster of buildings just off the main thoroughfare. Positioned, you notice with a grimace, directly upwind from most of the town. This is the industrial heart of Prosperity Gulch, and the source of its most potent smells, the tannery and the slaughterhouse. The two businesses often operated side by side for grimly practical reasons. The slaughterhouse produced the fresh hides, and the tannery processed them. You approach the slaughterhouse first. It is not so much a building as a blood-soaked patch of ground with a few wooden structures on it. A rickety corral holds a few nervous-looking cattle. The ground around the killing floor is a dark, muddy morass, saturated with years of blood. Flies swarm in a thick, buzzing carpet over everything. The butcher, in a leather apron, stained almost black with dried blood, is currently working on a carcass strung up from a wooden frame. With practiced, efficient movements, he skins the animal and guts it. The entrails and organs he doesn't want are simply tossed onto a steaming, reeking pile a few feet away. This gut pile is the town's unofficial buffet for stray dogs, pigs, and rats. It is a festering mountain of offal, slowly decomposing in the sun. The stench is overwhelming, a primal smell of death and decay that you can almost taste. There are no health inspectors, no regulations. The meat destined for the town's dinner tables is being processed in this open-air, fly-infested environment. The butcher might wipe his hands on his bloody apron before handling a cut of steak. The potential for cross-contamination is not a concept. It is a constant, unavoidable reality. Next door is the tannery, and if possible, it smells even worse. Tanning is the process of turning raw animal hides into leather, preventing them from decaying. It is an ancient craft, and a chemically intensive one. The first step you see is several men scraping the last bits of flesh and fat from the hides, adding to the general pile of waste. Then, The hides are soaked in baths to loosen the hair, but the key step is the tanning itself. The traditional method, and the one being used here, is bark tanning. The hides are soaked for weeks or even months in large pits filled with water and ground up tree bark, which is rich in tannins. These pits, you see, are just holes in the ground filled with a dark, stagnant liquid that looks like primordial soup. The smell is sour and pungent. Even more nauseating was the preliminary step for some tanning processes, which involved soaking the hides in a solution to soften them and make them more receptive to the tannins. This solution was often a foul concoction of water mixed with dung. Dog or bird dung, known as bait, was preferred for its enzymes. In other processes, urine was used. Large barrels were sometimes kept outside tanneries or public houses to collect urine for this very purpose. The ammonia in the urine helped to break down the hide fibers. So, the overpowering stench coming from this area is a complex blend. The iron tang of blood, the rot of the gut pile, the sour fermentation of the tanning pits, and the sharp, eye-watering ammonia from the chemical soaks. There is a continuing historical discussion about the social status of tanners and butchers. Their work was absolutely essential for the community, providing meat to eat and leather for shoes, saddles, and harnesses. But they were often social outcasts. Their workshops were smelly, unpleasant places, and the workers themselves were seen as perpetually unclean. In many older European cities, these trades were legally required to be located on the outskirts or downwind of the town. In the chaotic, unplanned growth of a frontier town, they often ended up right in the middle of everything. You watch for a few minutes, fascinated and repulsed. You see a man haul a finished piece of leather from a pit. It is stiff and dripping, but it is recognizably leather, the essential material of the West. From the stinking, foul process comes the saddle the cowboy rides, the boots the miner wears, and the harness for the farmer's plow. It is another of the West's grim paradoxes. Civilization's essential goods are produced through the most uncivilized and unsanitary of processes. You back away, eager to escape the olfactory nightmare. You now understand the town's geography of smells. The wind shifts, and for a moment, the foul air from the tannery is blown directly towards the main street, mingling with the scent of mud, manure, and the saloon. It is a potent reminder that in this town, you can't escape the filth because it is not just under your feet. It is in the very air you breathe. It is the byproduct of the town's own survival. Having identified the tannery and slaughterhouse as major hubs of nastiness, you start to see the whole town as a system of pollution. It is not just the designated dirty areas. The filth is mobile, and its primary mode of transport is wandering around on four legs. You begin to notice the animals, not the wild animals in the hills, but the domestic and semi-feral creatures that are an integral and incredibly messy part of town life. The most obvious are the horses. They are the engine of the West, essential for transport, ranching, and farming. Every other building has a hitching post out front, and there is always a horse or two tied to it. They are beautiful, powerful animals, but they are also prodigious producers of waste. An average horse produces up to 50 pounds of manure and several gallons of urine per day. Multiply that by the dozens of horses present in the town at any given time, and you begin to understand why the main street is more manure than mud. This created a problem that urban historians call the Great Horseman or Crisis of the 19th century. In big cities like New York and London, the sheer volume of horse waste was becoming an existential threat, burying the streets in filth and breeding biblical plagues of flies. Well, a small frontier town like this one isn't at that scale. The principle is the same. The streets are the stable. Then, there are the oxen and mules used to pull the heavy freight wagons. They are even larger and produce even more waste. You watch a team of 6 oxen, having just been unhitched from a massive wagon, standing placidly in the street, placidly adding to the problem. No one cleans it up. It is just there, a natural feature of the landscape. But it is not just the beasts of burden, as you saw on your first day. Pigs are a common sight. They are the town's free-roaming garbage disposals. rooting through the trash, heaps and gut piles. While this seems like a clever, self-sustaining system, it has a dark side. Pigs are omnivores. They will eat literally anything, including human waste from overflowing privies and the carcasses of diseased animals. They can then become carriers of diseases like trichinosis, a parasitic worm that can be transmitted to humans who eat undercooked pork. The pig that eats your garbage on Monday could be the pork chop on your plate on Friday. It is a terrifyingly efficient and invisible cycle of disease. And let us not forget the dogs. They are everywhere. Some are working dogs, herding cattle or guarding property. But most are strays, or town dogs, belonging to everyone and no one. They are a scruffy, mangy lot, covered in fleas and ticks, fighting over scraps thrown from the saloon's back door. They, too, contribute to the fecal landscape of the town, and in an era before rabies vaccinations, a stray dog's bite was not just a painful annoyance, it was a potential death sentence. Even the chickens, which many households keep for eggs, are a source of filth. They scratch in the dirt, peck at manure, then leave their droppings everywhere. There is a historical debate about how people in the 19th century perceived this constant, close proximity to animal filth. Did they see it as a normal, unavoidable part of life, a sign of a thriving agricultural community, or was it a source of complaint and concern? The evidence suggests a bit of both. While people were certainly more accustomed to rural smells and sights than we are today, newspapers and town council minutes from the period are filled with complaints about roaming pigs, dangerous dogs, and the state of the streets. The desire for a cleaner, more orderly environment existed, but the means and the political will to enforce it were often lacking. You watch as a horse, tied to a post outside the general store, swishes its tail. The motion disturbs a thick cloud of flies that have been feasting on a fresh pile of manure. The flies, now agitated, buzz off in all directions. One lands on a barrel of apples for sale on the porch. Another zips through the open door of the diner. You see the whole system in action. A perfectly designed network for spreading contamination. The animal waste is the foundation, the breeding ground. The flies are the delivery service, and the humans are the unwitting customers. This constant, intimate contact with animals and their waste is perhaps the single biggest difference between their world and yours. Your world has sanitized this relationship, hiding the slaughterhouses, regulating the dairies, and picking up after your pets. Their world is one of complete and total integration. The cow, the pig, and the horse are not abstract horses of food and power. They are your smelly, messy, ever-present neighbors. You step carefully to avoid a fresh pile of horse manure, only to nearly trip over a pig. It is a reminder that this town doesn't just belong to the people. It belongs to the beasts, too, and they are not tidy tenants. After days of being assaulted by filth from every conceivable angle, you start to fantasize about cleanliness, not just your own personal state, but the idea of clean as a business, a service, an oasis in this desert of dirt. You already visited the bathish, a prime example of hygiene as a commodity. Now, your new, stiff clothes, though louse-free, are starting to pick up the dust and grime of the town. The thought of washing them yourself in a bucket of questionable water is exhausting. There must be another way. Your quest leads you to a small, unassuming shack on a side street, distinguished only by a wisp of steam curling from a metal chimney pipe and a sign that is so faded you can barely read it. Chinese laundry. You push open the door and step into a world of heat, steam, and the clean, sharp smell of soap and hot iron. The air is thick with moisture. The room is small and crowded, with baskets of clothes piled high. Behind a long counter, a man is working with incredible focus and efficiency. He is Chinese, with a long, traditional queue braid hanging down his back. He sprinkles water from his mouth onto his shirt with a fine spray, then expertly presses it with a heavy, hot iron he pulls from a charcoal stove. The hiss of the steam is a constant, rhythmic sound. This was a common sight in the American West. Chinese immigrants, facing intense discrimination and barred from many other types of work like mining or land ownership, carved out a niche for themselves in the service industry. Laundries were one of the most prominent. It was brutally hard work, requiring long hours of boiling, scrubbing, and ironing in hot, humid conditions, but it was a service that was desperately needed for the bachelors of the frontier, the miners, cowboys, and laborers who had no wife or family to do their washing. The Chinese laundry was a godsend. It was a way to achieve a level of cleanliness and respectability that was otherwise impossible. A clean, starched collar and a pressed shirt were Odin status symbols. It showed you had the disposable income. A shirt might cost 10 to 15 cents to be laundered and the foresight to maintain your appearance. You approach the counter with your small bundle of undergarments and your now dusty work shirt. The laundryman looks up, his expression neutral. Communication is minimal. You point to your clothes. He takes them, scribbles a small, unique mark on a piece of paper and a corresponding one on the inside of your shirt tail. An early and ingenious ticketing system, and hands you the paper slip. He says a number in broken English. Today, you nod and pay him. As you leave, you realize you've just outsourced your battle against filth. You have paid a specialist to handle it for you. This transaction highlights a crucial aspect of 19th century society. Cleanliness was becoming a commercial enterprise, separating the population into those who cleaned and those who could afford to pay others to clean for them. The presence of the laundry also touches on a darker side of Western history. The Chinese immigrants who ran these businesses were often subjected to intense racism and persecution. They were seen as foreign and strange, and their economic success, however modest, bred resentment. Anti-Chinese leagues were formed, and violent riots, like the infamous one in Rock Springs, Wyoming, were not uncommon. The man in the laundry, working tirelessly in his steamy shop, is not just a businessman. He is a survivor, navigating a deeply hostile world. There is a historical debate that continues to this day about the role of Chinese immigrants in civilizing the West. Traditional histories often focus on the Anglo-American pioneers. However, some revisionist historians argue that by providing essential services like laundries and restaurants, Chinese immigrants introduced a level of domesticity, hygiene, and stability that was crucial to the development of frontier communities. They weren't just washing shirts. They were washing the grime off a raw and chaotic society. Thinking about this, you start to notice other, smaller examples of clean as a business. The bathish, the barbershop, the boot black on the corner offering to shine your muddy boots for a nickel. Each one is a small pocket of order, a place where money can be exchanged for a temporary reprieve from the dirt. These services created a visual class distinction. You could tell a man's status by the state of his collar. A grimy, frayed collar meant labor. A clean, white, starched one, likely fresh from the Chinese laundry, belonged to a banker, a lawyer, or a successful merchant. In a society that paid lip service to egalitarianism, cleanliness became a subtle but powerful way to signal social standing. You walk away from the laundry, your claim ticket clutched in your hand. In 2 days, you will have a clean shirt. It is a small thing, but it feels like a victory. You haven't conquered the filth of the West, but you've learned how to navigate its economy. You've learned that if you can't fight the dirt yourself, you can, for a price, hire a mercenary to do it for you. It is a system built on labor, money, and the universal human desire to not be completely disgusting. And in this town, that is a powerful economic driver. Your journey through this town has been a crash course in 19th century filth. You've seen the symptoms everywhere. The muddy streets, the contaminated water, the rampant disease. Now, you start to ponder the root cause. It is not just a lack of infrastructure or technology. It is a profound, fundamental lack of understanding. They are fighting a war against an enemy they can't see, name, or comprehend. They are living in a world without germs. You walk past the undertaker's shop, where another pine box is being loaded onto the wagon. The people in the street give it a wide berth, some holding a handkerchief to their noses. They believe the danger is in the air. The miasma, a foul odor emanating from the sick and the dead. This belief, while incorrect, was the dominant medical theory for centuries. It was logical. In a way, bad smells came from rotting, decaying things, and those things were associated with disease. Therefore, the smell itself must be the cause. This intellectual framework explains so many of the futile behaviors you've witnessed. The burning of tar barrels to purify the air, the stuffing of rags into window cracks, the dousing of oneself in perfume or cologne before venturing out. These weren't acts of superstition. They were rational responses based on the best available science of the time. They were just tragically, lethally wrong. The germ theory of disease, the revolutionary idea that invisible microorganisms cause sickness, was being developed in Europe by scientists like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch during this very period. But scientific breakthroughs don't spread overnight. It would take decades for these ideas to trickle down from the scientific community to medical schools, and even longer to reach the general public and a frontier-town doctor like Gus the barber. Here, the miasma theory still reigns supreme. You sit on a bench outside the general store, watching the town go by, and you contemplate the sheer horror of this ignorance. Imagine living in a world where you know that a terrible, invisible force is killing your friends and family, but you have no idea what it is or how it spreads. You might blame it on a divine punishment, a moral failing, or a disturbance in the environment. You would look for patterns, for causes, in all the wrong places. Maybe the cholera outbreak was caused by that comet that appeared in the sky last month. Maybe it was because Mrs. Gable, who was the first to die, was known to have a sharp tongue. Maybe it was the fault of the new immigrants who arrived last spring, bringing their strange ways and foreign diseases with them. This search for a scapegoat was a common and tragic byproduct of epidemic fear. It was easier to blame a person or a group than to accept a random, invisible killer. There is a fierce, ongoing debate among medical historians about the Great Transition period when the germ theory began to supplant the miasma theory. It was a clean break. For many years, the two theories coexisted and even blended. A doctor might accept that germs existed, but believe they were spontaneously generated by filth and then spread through miasmas. They might advocate for cleaning up garbage piles, not because they harbored bacteria, but because they produced foul-smelling, disease-causing air, the right action for the wrong reason. This lack of understanding explains the town's entire sanitary infrastructure, or lack thereof. Why not dig the pretty pit 50 yards away from the well? The water looks and tastes fine. The danger is in the smell from the privy, not in anything invisible seeping through the ground into the water. Why wash your hands before eating? Your hands look clean. The danger is in the unwholesome squality of the food itself, not in the microscopic filth you might be transferring to it. The concept of an asymptomatic carrier, a perfectly healthy person who is carrying and spreading a disease, would have been completely alien. This is why the flight of people from the town, which you witnessed earlier, was so dangerous. They felt fine, so they couldn't possibly be a threat. They were just escaping the bad air of the infected town, not realizing they were carrying the real source of the infection with them. You have been navigating this world with the massive, unfair advantage of modern knowledge. You know to boil the water, to avoid the fly-covered food, to wash your hands. For the people here, survival is a matter of luck, a strong constitution, and the random chance of not ingesting a lethal dose of pathogens. You look at your own hands. They look clean enough, but you know what is on them. The dust from the street, the grime from the bench, the bacteria from the coin you used to buy a drink. You are covered in an invisible zoo of microbes. The difference is, you know it is there. They don't. And that knowledge is the single greatest gulf that separates your world from theirs. It is the difference between a fighting chance and a blind gamble. The deadliest thing in the Old West was a gunslinger's bullet or a stampeding herd of cattle. It was the enemy you couldn't see. Your newfound appreciation for the germ theory makes you wonder, did anyone ever try to clean this place up? Was there no one in charge? No one who looked at the state of the main street and thought, this can't be right. Your curiosity leads you to a small, dusty building with a slightly crooked sign that reads Town Hall and Marshal's office. Inside, it is a simple, one-room affair. A pot-bellied stove sits in the corner, and a few wanted posters are tacked to the wall. At a large wooden desk sits the mayor. A portly man with a walrus mustache who also appears to be the town clerk, the land registrar, and half a dozen other things. This is the seat of government for Prosperity Gulch. You invent a plausible reason for your visit. Perhaps you are a journalist or a potential investor, and strike up a conversation. You gently steer the topic towards public improvements and the general state of the town. The mayor lets out a long, weary sigh. Son, he says, leaning back in his creaky chair. We've tried. He pulls out a large, leather-bound ledger from a shelf. Town council minutes. It reads. He blows a thick layer of dust off the cover and opens it up. He flips through the pages. A chronicle of the town's feeble attempts to legislate cleanliness. Here we are. June of 78. Ordinance number 4. It shall be unlawful for any citizen to allow swine to roam freely upon the main thoroughfare. Passed unanimously. He looks at you over the top of his spectacles. You've seen how many pigs are out there. Lasted about a week. Jedediah Smith argued his pigs were a public service, eating the garbage. Hard to argue with that. And who is going to go round up all the pigs? The marshal's busy with horse thieves. He flips another page. A classic. August of 78. Ordinance number 6. A fine of $1 shall be levied against any person found depositing offal, refuse, or other noisome substances into the street. He chuckles grimly. We collected exactly one fine from a newcomer who didn't know any better. Everyone else just started dumping their garbage at night or in the alley. It is like trying to bail out the ocean with a thimble. This was the fundamental problem facing any attempt at sanitary reform on the frontier. You can pass all the laws you want, but without the infrastructure, the resources, and the public buy-in to enforce them, they are just words on a page. The town has no sanitation department, no garbage collectors, no sewer system. The entire burden of enforcement falls on one overworked town marshal, who has more pressing concerns, like murderers and drunks, than wandering pigs. Furthermore, the frontier ethos of radical individualism worked directly against these kinds of communal efforts. A man's property was his own, and what he did on it, or what he threw from it into the street, was his own business. Any attempt by the government, even a tiny town council, to regulate this was seen as an infringement on personal liberty. The idea of sacrificing a little individual convenience for the greater public good was a tough sell. There is a continuing historical debate about the effectiveness of these early public health laws. Some historians argue they were important first steps, laying the legal groundwork for future, more successful reforms. Others contend they were largely performative, designed to make the town council look like it was doing something, without any real expectation of change. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The laws reflected a genuine, if nascent, desire for a cleaner environment, but they were stymied by the practical and cultural realities of the time. And here is my favorite. The mayor says, a note of pure exasperation in his voice. The Privy Ordinance of 79. All privies must be constructed no less than 50 feet from any known well or water source. A fine idea. Dr. Adams from back east suggested it. Said it would stop the summer sickness. He shakes his head. First off, nobody knows where the water source underground really is. Second, my own privy is 40 feet from my well. Am I supposed to dig a new hole and move the whole dang shack because of some newfangled idea? Nobody did it. Not a soul. The mayor's frustration is palpable. He is a man caught between the desire for a better town and the stubborn realities of human nature and a complete lack of resources. He governs a population that is independent, suspicious of authority, and largely ignorant of the scientific reasons behind the laws. You thank the mayor for his time and step back out into the street. You see the town in a new light. It is not just an anarchic mess. There are rules. There is a government. But the government is like a leaky boat in a hurricane. It is trying its best, but it is overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the problem. You see a man toss a bucket of dirty water out his front door, right into the street. He is breaking ordinance number 6. But who is going to stop him? The marshal is down at the saloon, dealing with a brawl. The mayor is buried in paperwork. The law exists, but it has no teeth. The filth of the West isn't just a product of ignorance. It is a product of a specific kind of freedom, the freedom to do as you please, even if it means fouling your own nest. The town is a living monument to the limits of legislation in the face of ingrained habits, and a deeply ingrained cultural resistance to being told what to do. The path to a cleaner future won't be paved by laws alone. It will require a fundamental shift in how people see the world and their responsibility to the community around them. And that kind of change, you realize, is the slowest and hardest kind of change there is. Days have passed since the epidemic first gripped the town. The initial panic has subsided, replaced by a grim, exhausted resignation. The death toll has been high, but the disease appears to be burning itself out. Life, in its stubborn, relentless way, is beginning to return to a semblance of normalcy. And as you walk through the recovering town, you start to notice small, almost imperceptible signs of change. The first faint glimmers of progress. Your attention is drawn to a group of men working in the middle of the main street. It is not a brawl or a commotion, but organized labor. They are laying down a wooden boardwalk. It is a simple structure, just a raised walkway of thick planks running along one side of the street, in front of the general store and the hotel. But its significance is immense. For the first time, there is a way to get from one building to another without wading through the foul, sucking mire. Women in long skirts can now go to the store without ruining their hems. Men can walk to the hotel without arriving caked in mud and manure. It is a tiny, linear oasis of stability and cleanliness. It is a declaration of war on the mud. You watch as a woman steps onto the new boardwalk for the first time. The look on her face is one of pure, unadulterated relief. She walks its length, her steps sure and clean, a small, triumphant smile on her face. This simple structure is more than just wood. It is a psychological victory. It is a tangible piece of evidence that things can get better, that the environment doesn't have to be a constant, oppressive force. A little further down the street, you see another subtle change. A man is digging a well, but he is not just digging a shallow pit like the one behind the hotel. He is using a more advanced auger, boring deep into the earth, past the contaminated surface layers, seeking a cleaner, safer source of water deep below. He is lining the well with brick as he goes, creating a sealed shaft that will be less susceptible to surface runoff. He probably doesn't understand the germ theory, but he is working from an empirical understanding that deeper water is often cleaner and safer than surface water. It is progress through observation and common sense. These small changes represent a slow, creeping evolution. The frontier is not a static place. With time, as a settlement becomes more permanent and prosperous, the raw survivalist mentality begins to give way to a desire for comfort, order, and safety. The very idea of civic improvement, which the mayor despaired over, starts to take root. There is an ongoing historical debate about the primary drivers of these sanitary improvements in the 19th century. Was it the top-down influence of public health reformers and new scientific theories? Or was it a bottom-up demand from ordinary citizens, particularly women, who were tired of living in filth and danger? The answer is likely a combination of both. The doctors from back east might provide the scientific rationale, but the political will to spend tax money on a boardwalk or a new well often came from the persistent agitation of the town's residents. Even the architecture is slowly changing. A new building is going up, and you notice it has something remarkable. Glass windows, not the small, grimy panes of the older buildings, but large, clear sheets of glass that will let in light and can be opened to let in fresh air or closed to keep out the dust. Glass was expensive and difficult to transport, so its appearance is a sign of increasing prosperity and a growing desire for brighter, healthier living spaces. You even notice a change in personal habits. You see a woman meticulously cleaning the area in front of her house, not just sweeping the dirt, but sprinkling it with water to keep the dust down. You see the saloon keeper, for the first time, shoveling out the old, saturated sawdust from his floor and replacing it with a fresh, clean layer. These are mandated changes. They are voluntary acts, signs of a rising standard of what is considered acceptable. This is how progress happens, not in a sudden, dramatic revolution, but in a slow, piecemeal accumulation of small improvements. A boardwalk here, a deeper well there, a new window, a cleaner floor. Each one is a small victory against the chaos and filth. Each one makes life a little safer, a little more pleasant. The town is still a dirty, dangerous place by your standards. The outhouses still leak, the flies still swarm, and the understanding of disease is still primitive. But it is better than it was a week ago, and it will be better still a year from now. You are witnessing the very beginning of the taming of the West. Not the taming of the land or its native peoples, but the taming of the domestic environment. The slow, arduous process of turning a raw, chaotic camp into a functioning, civilized town. The future is not yet here, but for the first time, you can see the path leading towards it, and it is being built one wooden plank, one deeper well, one clean floor at a time. The battle is far from over, but the tide, ever so slowly, is beginning to turn. You stand on the new boardwalk, your boots making a satisfying, solid sound on the clean planks. The sun is setting, casting a warm, golden light over the town. The air is still and cool. The epidemic has passed, leaving scars but also a renewed sense of purpose. The sounds of hammering and construction have been replaced by the gentle murmur of evening life. From here, for the first time, the town almost looks peaceful. It is time to leave. Your journey in this world is over. You came here looking for the reality behind the myth, and you found it in the mud, the flies, the sickness, and the smells. You experienced the relentless, grinding struggle for survival in a world that was actively hostile to human health. Now, as you prepare to depart, you take a moment to look back and compare the world you've just lived in with the one that Hollywood created. The image of the clean-cut, heroic cowboy, played by actors like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood, seems almost laughable to you now. You think of the real cowboy you saw, with his grime-caked clothes and the cloud of lice that likely followed him. The cinematic hero who coolly orders a whiskey in a bustling but tidy saloon bears no resemblance to the reality of standing on a floor made of spit and sawdust, drinking to numb the pain of a rotting tooth. The Hollywood heroine, with her pristine calico dress and perfectly coiffed hair, even in the middle of a desert, is a complete fantasy. You picture the real women you saw, their hands raw from lye soap, their faces etched with exhaustion from the never-ending war against dirt, their lives a testament to resilience in the face of overwhelming filth. Even the gunfights, the central trope of the Western genre, seem less significant now. The quick draw duel at high noon is a dramatic, cinematic event, but you know that the slow, silent, and far more prolific killer was the cholera bacteria in the well water. A man was far more likely to die from a bout of dysentery contracted from a dirty fly than from a bullet in the back. The true villain of the West was the black-hatted outlaw. It was the microscopic pathogen. There is a profound and ongoing academic discussion about why the sanitary reality was so completely erased from the national myth of the West. Why did we, as a culture, choose to remember the heroic violence and forget the mundane, disgusting reality of the struggle for health? Some historians argue that the myth-making process requires simplification and sanitization. The story of rugged individualism and civilizing the wilderness is a more appealing nation-building narrative than a story about digging latrines and fighting lice. The filth complicates the hero's journey, making it less glamorous, more pathetic. Others suggest it is a form of collective forgetting. The generation that lived through those conditions had no desire to romanticize the filth. They wanted to escape it. Their children and grandchildren, living in a world of indoor plumbing and public sanitation, could then afford to imagine a cleaner, more heroic version of their ancestors' past. The myth was created by the pioneers, but for them, in retrospect, you look down the main street, A man is lighting the kerosene lamps for the evening. Their soft glow pushes back against the encroaching darkness. It is a beautiful image, but you know the truth. You know about the mud that still lurks just off the edge of the boardwalk. You know about the germs still swimming in the well water. You know about the leaky privy behind the hotel and the lingering sadness in the houses that the plague has touched. Your journey has been disgusting, uncomfortable, and at times terrifying, but it has also been illuminating. You have seen firsthand the incredible resilience of people living in conditions you can barely imagine. You have seen the slow, painful birth of progress built on a foundation of ignorance and hardship. You have learned that the taming of the West was not just about fighting and building. It was about washing, scrubbing, and surviving. The Hollywood West is a fantasy, a cleaned, simple story of good versus evil. The real West, you now understand, was a much messier, smellier, and more complex place. Its story is not one of clean heroes and clear victories, but of flawed, tough, and often very dirty people, just trying to make it to the next day. And in its own way, that story is far more heroic than any shootout at the Corral. You've lifted the rug on the American West, and while what you found underneath was horrifying, it was also, undeniably, profoundly human. The evening has deepened now, and the kerosene lamps cast long, flickering shadows that dance and sway, making the familiar shapes of the town seem strange and new, as if they belong to a dream. The air grows still, carrying the distant, lonely sound of a coyote's howl from the hills, a reminder of the vast, untamed world that lies just beyond the edges of this small circle of light. Your own journey is fading, the sharp edges of your experience is softening. The mud and the smells and the fears beginning to recede like a tide going out. The ache in your jaw is just a memory now, a phantom echo in the quiet of the night. You can feel the stiff, new fabric of your clothes relaxing, molding to you as you drift in the peaceful space between waking and sleeping. The world of Prosperity Gulch, with all its harsh realities, is dissolving, its frantic energy replaced by a slow, gentle rhythm, like steady, deep breathing. The hard wooden boardwalk beneath your feet seems to melt away, and you feel yourself floating, suspended in the cool, dark air, a silent observer watching the last lights of the town wink out, one by one, until only the vast, star-dusted canvas of the prairie sky remains. You are no longer there. You are here, safe in your own time, in your own bed, leaving the ghosts of the past to their eternal, dusty slumber. The story is over. And now, there is only rest.